Chapter 391, Disappearance. What news? Zhang Han asked in a hurry. On Mount Shifang in the eastern suburb of Xihang, Uy, the patriarch of the Qingfeng sect, seems to know about your parents. Tanan answered slowly. The Qingfeng sect was a small sect with less than 200 students. Uy was close to Grandmaster middle stage 3 years ago, so you should be careful when facing him. You can visit him, but I can't guarantee that he will tell you everything. Zhang Han frowned and said, I see, thank you, Director. Oh, yes, I have already told Mr. Hong that the 10-day appointment has been cancelled, but there is a bigger problem. Tanan paused and then said helplessly, Qingshan is back and you'd better pray that he hasn't advanced to the Grandmaster late stage, or he would be your biggest problem. You can go to Xihang to avoid him for a while and give me some time for preparation. I'll help you once more for the sake of your father. One small Tanan could repay Zhang Han's father's kindness, and then he would not be so enthusiastic to help Zhang Han anymore. Qingshan, don't worry about him, but I hope Director can do me another favor, Zhang Han said. What's the matter? Tanan asked in surprise. Tanan didn't expect that Zhang Han would not be afraid of Hector. Was he not afraid of death? Qingshan ranked 17th in the martial arts circle of Hong Kong and was admired by all. If he successfully advanced to the Grandmaster late stage, he might not deign to negotiate with Tanan. These things, which even Tanan felt were a little tricky and needed to be dealt with in a few days, were ignored by Zhang Han. Tanan thought it was funny. Newborn calves are not afraid of tigers. Hearing Zhang Han's other requests, Tanan was also interested. He didn't know what Zhang Han wanted to do. Soon after, Zhang Han said directly, I need the 5 elements furnace. Can I borrow it for a period of time? 5 elements furnace? The treasure is worth 1 million points. Tanan was stunned. He had rejected so many students of the Heavenly Elixir sect who wanted to buy the 5 elements furnace and even repriced it at 1 million points to prevent it from being sold. But Tanan was even more surprised as he asked, You know alchemy? Yes. You. Thinking of the lack of alchemists in the National Security Agency, Tanan's eyes lit up. What level of elixir can you make? There were 5 alchemists in the National Security Agency of Hong Kong, but their skills proved that hiring them was a waste of resources. Tanan had visited them 3 times, sat in their office for about 7 hours in total, and listened to the sound of furnace explosions more than 100 times. But alchemy is so profound that even the Heavenly Elixir sect found it difficult to produce high-level elixir. As long as it's the elixir you want, I can make it, Zhang Han replied. What? Tanan was shocked. Are you kidding me? I'm not in the mood to play a joke on you. Lend me the 5 elements furnace and I'll make you several furnaces of elixir when I'm free. This. Tanan frowned and said, Prove it to me. Wait for me. Finishing those words, Zhang Han directly hung up. He sat on the sofa silently for a minute. With the foundation elixir and the 5 elements furnace, there was a 60% chance to get the best foundation elixir, and less than a 1% chance to get the perfect foundation elixir. Though all the resources had been prepared, the perfect foundation elixir depended on luck. Zhang Han had a hectic schedule over the next few days, including making foundation elixir, advancing to the foundation stage and visiting Xihang. He had to seize the opportunity since Uy wouldn't stay in his sect for long. As for Xian's business, the Qiao family knew what they should do and it would take them a few days, which provided Zhang Han 3 to 4 days to complete his plan. After thinking about these things, Zhang Han got up, picked up his windbreaker from the sofa, put it on, and went downstairs. He quickly made 2 trays of small steamed buns and put them on the steamer. Then he looked at Zhao Feng and said, Feng, steam the buns for 15 minutes then turn off the flame. Okay. Zhao Feng nodded. Zhang Han stepped out and said, I'm going out for a few days, make arrangements for everything, and have Leng take good care of Xian. Then Zhang Han went out of the restaurant, got in the panda car, and left directly. After driving for a while, Zhang Han stopped at the roadside, took out his cell phone, and called Xian. Doot. It was a good sign that she didn't turn off the phone. Doot, doot, doot. But the phone was not connected. The second call was still not connected. So Zhang Han dialed Zuf's number. Doot, doot. Hello. When Zuf's words just came, ding. Zhang Han's cell phone was out of power and shut down. After thinking for a while, Zhang Han put down his mobile phone and drove directly to the headquarters of the National Security Agency of Hong Kong. When Zhang Han arrived, the horsetail girl in the reception zone on the first floor greeted him with a smile. Protector Zhang, I know where the treasure house is. Director Liz waiting for you there. Zhang Han nodded his head and went directly to the treasure house. Lieutenant was sitting in the room where the treasure was hidden. Seeing Zhang Han come in, he said with a faint smile, Boy, I came here after cancelling an appointment, so you have to give me a satisfactory answer today. If you play tricks with me, open the door. Before Lieutenant had finished, Zhang Han interrupted him. Lieutenant was stunned and amused by Zhang Han. How could Zhang Han not be in awe of him? Was he too kind to the boy? It seemed so, but if he couldn't prove himself today, HMPH. Lieutenant snorted and opened the door of the treasure house with his token. After they entered the treasure house, Lieutenant closed the door with his own token with the highest authority, and set the order that no one else should enter the treasure house. Everything you need is here. Make a first stage elixir first to show me your skill, Lieutenant said. Sure. Zhang Han responded in a low voice and walked inside, looking at the counters on both sides as he walked, and sometimes he would pick up a treasure at random. This time, there was no light alarm in the compartment. Since Lieutenant had the highest authority, with his token, even if all the treasures here were removed, the alarm would not ring. After taking some treasures, Zhang Han took the lead to the room where the 5 elements furnace was, and stopped there. Lieutenant's mouth twitched when he saw it. He went up and opened the door for Zhang Han. After entering the chamber, Zhang Han looked around the 5 elements furnace, and then put the flint under the furnace. Control the fire. Suddenly, Zhang Han opened his mouth. Lieutenant stared at Zhang Han. Are you using me as an assistant? That's okay. If you can't make elixir later, I will teach you a lesson. Lieutenant complained silently, and at the same time, he released his spiritual force and poured it into the flint. Puff, puff, puff. The fire came from the flint and burned under the furnace. Turn down the fire. Lieutenant withdrew some spiritual force and the fire got much smaller. It's too small. Lieutenant was annoyed and immediately turned up the fire. Like this, after 5 repetitions, Zhang Han made other movements. Zhang Han didn't mean to make Lieutenant be his assistant, for he was not in the mood to joke now. Zhang Han was unable to release his own spiritual force yet, but he didn't want to control the fire with a foundation. Therefore, he asked Lieutenant for help. Fire controlling also required skills, and Lieutenant was at the level of a layman. If he made elixir by himself, he could only get a pot of soup in the end. So Lieutenant was in charge of controlling the fire, and Zhang Han kept adding materials to the furnace. After an hour and a half, suddenly Zhang Han said, "Turn the fire to the maximum." As Lieutenant accelerated the movement of his spiritual force, the flint burst and the last flame burned for 30 seconds. Zhang Han seized the opportunity and gave the 5 elements furnace a slap. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 5 white elixirs flew out of the furnace. Zhang Han grabbed them in one hand, opened the hand to Lieutenant, and said in a low voice, "The first stage elixir you want." Lieutenant's eyes fixed on the elixir and he asked, "What kind of elixir is this?" Spirit restoring elixir can help you restore spiritual force in 10 seconds. The higher your level is, the less spiritual force will be restored. For example, if you are at the profound stage, you will probably restore half of your spiritual force. Therefore, it is merely a first stage elixir. Zhang Han replied. So easy. What is the success rate of your making first stage elixirs? Is it 30%? Lieutenant asked in a hurry. Zhang Han pondered and said, with the help of the 5 elements furnace, the success rate is 100%. He didn't tell Danan that his success rate would always be over 70% even with a broken iron stove. Is that true? Lieutenant gasped and looked at Zhang Han in shock. However, Zhang Han did not reply to him. Can I have one? Lieutenant asked. Sure. Lieutenant took one and felt that his spiritual force had recovered slightly in a few seconds. Though it was useless to him, it would be a great treasure for those profound stage masters and earth stage masters. Lieutenant was a little excited and said, I didn't expect you to be a genius of alchemy. The 100% success rate is amazing. Even the gifted students of the Heavenly Elixir sect don't have this success rate. Ha. What's the highest level of elixir you can make? What's the highest level you have ever seen? Zhang Han asked. Zhang Han found that the level of elixir in this world was similar to that in the Cultivation World. Maybe the elixir inheritance here was more complete. The highest level I've seen is the 3rd stage, which could only be made by the Patriarch and Elders of the Heavenly Elixir sect. Generally speaking, it would be amazing if someone could make a 2nd stage elixir. By the way, a few years ago, I heard of the emergence of a 4th stage elixir. Well, the 3rd stage elixir is not difficult for me. Lieutenant pondered for 10 seconds then finally said, can you make a 2nd stage elixir? If you can, I'll allow you to keep the 5 elements furnace until someone could afford it. 2nd stage elixir? Zhang Han turned around to fetch a series of resources. This time, Zhang Han spent more time making elixirs, nearly 4 hours. At about 11 o'clock in the evening, Lieutenant, like an assistant, walked out with the 5 elements furnace on his shoulder, laughing so hard that he could not close his mouth. He looked at Zhang Han with satisfaction and glanced at his right pocket from time to time, for there were 3 2nd stage elixirs in it. After putting the 5 elements stove in the back seat of the panda car and watching Zhang Han drive away slowly, Lieutenant's smile suddenly faded as he muttered to himself. Such a genius, I must protect him. He Kingshan, I hope you don't cross the line, or I will kill you even if you have advanced to the late stage. The old Danon was at the Grand Master middle stage and hadn't advanced to the late stage yet. Masters like him all had some powerful skills that they had never shown to others. Zhang Han went all the way back to the restaurant. At this time, the door of the restaurant was locked, and the whole restaurant was cold and empty. He went upstairs to take all the resources to his 2nd bedroom, and then went out and walked to Mount New Moon. At the top of the mountain, Zhang Han sat on a thick branch of the Thunder Yang tree. Little Hai sat at the back side of the tree, and Dai was dozing off against the trunk. He sat like this all night until the sun rose. A blue light burst out from the top of the Yuan King tree. A fruit shining with blue light was formed. Yuan King fruit appeared. Zhang Han quickly took down the Yuan King fruit, packed many materials with cloth bags, went to the east cliff, and jumped into the sea. Last night, when Ziyan, Meng, Zif, Liang Hao, and his sister arrived at the restaurant, Meng pouted and asked, Papa, where is Papa? Your father is going out for a few days, but he has made buns for you and your mother. Zhao Feng grabbed the 2 trays of steamed buns. I want Papa. Meng started to cry. It took them a long time to comfort Meng. Finally, the girl began to eat the buns while Ziyan sat by in silence. On her face covered up with sunglasses were loss, sorrow, sadness, and a trace of grievance, looking puzzled. In this way, after sitting for an hour, the group left. Zhao Feng sat until 9 o'clock and went back to the company. Today, Zhao Feng came here early in the morning and thought Zhang Han was back when he saw the panda car. However, the door was locked. He opened it and entered the restaurant, finding the room empty. Where is the master? Zhao Feng felt puzzled, so he sat in a chair in the dining hall and waited silently. He waited until 4 p.m. and there was no sign of Zhang Han, which made him a little impatient. He made several calls. Lilai, Is your brother with you? No, he's not in the restaurant either. I haven't seen him since last night. Will you come here later? Okay, I'll wait for you. Zif, is the boss with you? No. Oh, I see. The boss is missing. I don't know where he is since his phone is turned off. Ahoo, go to Mount New Moon and see if the boss is there. About half an hour later, Zhang Li arrived. She felt it so strange after knowing what had happened, and she didn't know what her brother was going to do. At 7 o'clock in the evening, Xian, Zif, and Meng Meng arrived. Xian was still wearing sunglasses. Her eyes were red and swollen recently, so she couldn't go out without sunglasses. This time, she was still sitting on the sofa, silent. No one knew what she was thinking about. After sitting for an hour and a half, she got up and left. That night, Zhao Feng, Zhang Li, and Liu Qing were in the restaurant. At 9 o'clock, Liang Hao and Liang Mengkai arrived. This made Zhao Feng feel a little surprised. It was not until 11 o'clock in the evening that the brother and sister left. On the third day, there was still no news from Zhang Han, and everyone began to worry. Instructor Liu. Zhao Feng called Instructor Liu and said directly, "Can you check if there's any news from my master? Check the flights and so on. Has he left Hong Kong? Has he shown up somewhere? Okay, I'll arrange for someone to check on it now." Instructor Liu nodded. It took a long time to find out the news. Zhang Han left with some things after he returned that night, and he never appeared again. Where on earth has my brother gone? Zhang Li was a little anxious. She was in a bad mood, but there was nothing she could do but wait in silence. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Zif drove over followed by Liang Hao. In fact, they already knew that Zhang Han was not in the restaurant, but Meng Meng insisted on coming and Xian didn't object to her, so they went to the restaurant directly. This time, Xian sat on the sofa for 2 hours, silent. "Are you running away?" Xian didn't know that the reason why she had been confused in recent days was that her mind was full of Zhang Han. But the genuine photos, the video, the voice, the phone call, and the location information he sent, all this turned into a huge hammer and was smashing down in Xian's mind. It was painful. For the first time, she was in such a complex and desperate mood. She was at a loss and didn't know what to do, as if she had become a shell without a soul. After sitting for 2 hours, Xian got up and her voice trembled. "Let's go." Zif left with Meng Meng in her arms, followed by Liang Hao and Liang Mengkai. Zhao Feng and the others shook their heads helplessly. When Zhang Han was away, they all seemed to have lost their mainstay. What should they do? Zhao Feng felt a headache. He sat off to the side sighing. At about 10 o'clock in the evening, in Union Garden, after coaxing Meng Meng to sleep, they all sat on the sofa in the living room on the second floor. "I don't know where my brother-in-law is. Meng Meng eats very little in the evening and keeps crying and making noise all these days. Can she bear it if she goes on like this?" said Zif in great distress. Then she looked at Xian and asked, "Sister Yan, could you please tell us the details?" Xian was not wearing sunglasses and looked haggard. She did not answer Zif's question. "It's not good to go on like this. I think it's better for you to talk openly. No matter what the result is, there must be a conclusion." Liang Hao sighed. Sometimes, husbands and wives will quarrel like this. But Liang Hao felt that the conflict seemed to drag on for a long time. No matter what the matter was, if he wanted them to make up, he had to give them a chance to make it clear. But now, Zhang Han is missing. Where can they talk about it? Chuf said angrily. "I have a way to get the boss out." Liang Mengkai thought for a moment and suddenly said, "What's the method?" Zif asked in a hurry. "Pretend to get engaged." Liang Mengkai put out her tongue and said, "I saw this plot in a soap opera a few days ago, but it's going to cost my brother a little. Sister Yan and my brother pretend to get engaged tomorrow, and only invite some familiar friends. We'll tell Zhao Feng about this, and the boss will surely appear. This is not appropriate." Liang Hao hesitated. "Do you have a better way? Anyway, it's fake. Then you can explain to Zhang Han that you're making a movie. Liang Mengkai stared at Liang Hao and said, well, have you ever liked Sister Yan before? Why are you so timid now? Liang Hao didn't know what to say. Oh, now that Zhang Li knows it, according to her character, will she still talk to me in the future? But after thinking about it, Liang Hao sighed and said, I have no problem, this method is feasible. As long as they make up, Zhang Li should not be angry with me. I'm tired, I'm going to have a rest, Ziyan said wearily and went straight to the bedroom. Zif thought about it and followed in. About 10 minutes later, Zif came out and sat on the sofa, announcing, we will do as Mengkai said, if my brother-in-law doesn't show up tomorrow, Sister Yan will go back to Singapore. Yes, if you don't come, I'll leave. Tomorrow was also the last day of the 3-day deadline that Zhang Han planned. After discussing the details with Zif, Liang Hao and his sister left the room. In the elevator, Liang Hao sighed. After getting in the car, he said, I'll tell Lilai about it first. I don't want her to misunderstand me. You can't tell the truth, you can't tell it. Liang Mengkai hurriedly said, brother, how do you still think of yourself? You have to take the whole situation into consideration. Don't hold back when you follow the plan. I'll inform them, and you don't have to worry about it. After that, Liang Mengkai dialed Zhao Feng's number directly. Hello, Zhao Feng, I have something to tell you. Ziyan and my brother are getting engaged tomorrow, and the banquet is on the top floor of the Peach Blossom Hotel. Remember to go there. Before she hung up, she clearly heard Zhao Feng's cell phone falling to the ground. With just a few words, maybe the boss will come back at midnight, Liang Mengkai rolled his eyes and said, well, I'll be a bad man. Liang Hao sighed, then suddenly sneezed, so he sighed again and started his car to leave Union Garden. In the restaurant, Zhao Feng's mind went blank after he got the news. He informed the others, and all the people on the scene began shouting. What? How is that possible? Where is brother Zhang Han? Look for him. I'm going to be mad at Liang Hao. Where is my brother? Let's find a way quickly, cried Zhang Li eagerly. Think about it, Instructor Liu. Zhao Feng looked at Instructor Liu. Instructor Liu shuddered and said, I'm going to call someone now and start carpet search. The people in the restaurant stayed up all night. The next morning, Zhang Li's eyes were red with anxiety. Anyway, they can't get engaged. Zhao Feng, you. Don't worry, Lilai, even if the master doesn't come back, I will stop them. I've just sent someone over. When the master doesn't come back at noon, we'll go there too, Zhao Feng replied. Eh? Instructor Liu suddenly shook his head and said, if the boss doesn't come back, then we can't just wait, we have to think of other ways. What is the way? Zhao Feng suddenly said, I remember. What? Everyone looked at Zhao Feng. He ran to the counter with a notebook hurriedly, where he finally found a business card. It's him, Mr. Sheng, the chairman of Anu and the supreme master of the hacker world. He is sure to find out the details, and then we can find a solution. You should call and ask, Zhang Li said in a hurry. Okay. Zhao Feng quickly dialed the personal number on the business card. Hello, Mr. Sheng, this is Meng's recreational restaurant, and we want to ask you for help. Yes? Great. Is it convenient for you to come to the restaurant now? Seeing the success, Zhang Li quickly dialed Zuf's number. Fei, do me a favor, take my sister-in-law's cell phone out and take it to the restaurant. While the whole restaurant was busy preparing, in the hall of Kiao family's main residence, there were 13 senior members of the Kiao family headed by Patriarch Kiao. The atmosphere in the room was so tense that they seemed to be waiting for someone. Suddenly, the door of the hall was opened. Kiao Luo, in casual clothes, came in lazily. Patriarch, as soon as I got off the plane, you picked me up. Is there any new task? Asked Kiao Luo. She was a little smug. She had studied finance in the UK for 4 years. Now she had come back to show her strength and made 2 successful businesses. Obviously, she would enter the core of the Kiao family, which was her dream. Kiao Luo, come here. Patriarch Kiao stood up and waved to her, expressionless. Kiao Luo smiled. She felt the atmosphere was a little weird, but she didn't think much about it and went straight over. Patriarch, Pa. Before she could finish speaking, the Kiao family leader gave Kiao Luo a fierce slap in the face. For a moment, red fingerprints appeared on her left cheek. Kiao Luo staggered and stared at Patriarch Kiao. Pa. Another slap from Patriarch Kiao. You're good, aren't you, huh? Do you know how much trouble you have caused? As Patriarch Kiao spoke, he slapped Kiao Luo in the face without any pity. None of the senior members present came out to help her. You dare to provoke such a tyrannical Master Zhang, what else do you dare not do? How long have you been back? If you stay longer, will the Kiao family be ruined by you? In the quiet hall, aside from the scolding of Patriarch Kiao, there was only Kiao Luo's cry of pain. At first, she didn't know who Master Zhang was, but when she knew who it was, she was in total despair. Chapter 392. After the rain, the sky looked blue. Returning out gaze back to Zhang Han. On that day, carrying many martial arts resources, he jumped into the sea and swam to the place where the ship sank. After all, he was just at the early stage of qi refining, and it was so tiring for him to carry so many items. When he got to the stone house under the wreck, he was exhausted. Bang! Putting those resources and the 5 elements furnace aside, Zhang Han sat with his legs crossed, and activated the treasure-searching formulas to restore his spiritual force. The spiritual force here was so rich that it took him merely half an hour to restore all his strength. I'm still too weak in the early stage of qi refining. Zhang Han shook his head slightly, looking at the room. He picked up the cattail cushion and said softly, there are many dangers in the way of cultivation. You just went the wrong way. After that, Zhang Han sent the cattail cushion from the cave into the sea. No matter what the level of the stone house owner was, he helped Zhang Han. After putting the 5 elements furnace in the center of the stone house, Zhang Han took out a foundation. Spirit controlling formation, open. After the formation was placed and activated, Zhang Han felt that all the spiritual qi in the stone house could be controlled by him. It's about to start. Zhang Han sighed. He was worrying about Xian and thinking about his parents at the same time. So Zhang Han sat with his legs crossed, closed his eyes, and meditated. No desire, no demand, no desire, no demand. Calm down and keep inner peace. Thought sealing method. Kaboom! The spiritual qi in his body and stone house stabbed Zhang Han's mind, which made him wake up immediately. With the departure of all kinds of thoughts, he seemed to become a cold machine, with only the furnace in front of him and only the idea of making foundation elixir. Therefore, Zhang Han began to make elixir. There were 10 legendary luminous pearls in the stone house, like soft lights. Zhang Han sat in front of the 5 elements furnace and controlled the spiritual force by controlling the spirit controlling formation to stimulate a flint. The fire moved at his will, and from time to time, he threw a variety of resources into the furnace. The first one was Yuan King fruit. The hardness of Yuan King fruit was comparable to that of diamonds, making it the most difficult thing to refine. There was no concept of time here, and Zhang Han didn't know how long he had been in the stone room. When the last material was put in, half an hour later, the last flint burst. A big fire began surrounding the furnace and was soon absorbed by the ears representing yin and yang on the upper side of the furnace, and gradually gathered to the 5 pillars on the lower side. The whole furnace burnt for 10 minutes. Kaboom! All of a sudden, there was a dull sound in the furnace, and then, whoosh! A white elixir flew out of the furnace. Zhang Han grabbed it and almost dislocated his arm. Success! Zhang Han opened his hand and looked at it carefully, then he shook his head and sighed. Just a 3rd stage foundation elixir, for the quality of the material is still a little low. I hope I can advance to the building base stage in one go. In addition to Yuan King fruit, the quality of the other materials was not very high, therefore, Zhang Han gave up on his original plan of making the perfect foundation elixir. Then Zhang Han swallowed the foundation elixir. He closed eyes and began to activate the treasure-searching formulas. After taking the elixir, all of a sudden, a stream of running water was heard coming from Zhang Han's body. The energy contained in the foundation elixir was like a waterfall, washing Zhang Han's body and finally converging into his meridians. In this way, Zhang Han activated the treasure-searching formulas several times. The spiritual force in his body had changed from invisible at the beginning to starlight and was gradually atomizing. As time went by, boom, when Zhang Han's spiritual force was completely atomized, there was a thunderous sound in his danshan. The danshan was open. The atomized spiritual force swarmed in. Gradually, his danshan became the most important transfer station in the center. Even if Zhang Han didn't deliberately run the treasure-searching formulas, the formulas could run on their own at a slower speed, which meant that even when Zhang Han was sleeping, he would cultivate at a much slower speed. At this time, the spiritual qi in the stone house was much less than before, but was still rich. Zhang Han needed it to advance to the building base stage. Hiss. All of a sudden, all the spiritual qi in the stone house converged on Zhang Han's body and turned into a stream of energy. With the spiritual force of energy in the meridians, the energy kept impacting Zhang Han's danshan. At this time, the danshan of Zhang Han was called the most common 3-inch danshan of building base cultivators. But the best building base cultivators had a 6-inch danshan. A perfect building base danshan should be 9 inches. Instead of representing the length of the danshan, the 9 inches refers to the spiritual force carrying capacity of the inner space of the danshan, as well as the size of the elixir, which was the most important. A perfect building base cultivator could get an 8-inch elixir and then a 7-inch yuan ying. Though the best yuan ying should be 9 inches, a 7-inch yuan ying was enough to bring the cultivator some supernatural powers. So Zhang Han's task at this time was to get a 6-inch danshan. The spiritual force and the massive spiritual qi were constantly scouring Zhang Han's danshan. This made Zhang Han feel very painful, but he knew that after suffering, it would be sweet. In this way, as Zhang Han's danshan continued to upgrade, there was a dull roar from his body. But when it came to the 5-inch danshan, only 30% of the spiritual qi remained. Zhang Han's eyelashes quivered slightly. He gave up the control and let the spiritual force in his body guide the violent spiritual qi all the way up into his mind. At the same time, Zhang Han murmured, "Seal the evil, shock the soul, link the nowhere, soul sense C, open." Kaboom! There was the dull boom of an explosion in Zhang Han's mind. It was an ancient forbidden method, open the soul sense C with 3 thoughts. It was classified as a forbidden method because 99% of the cultivators were unable to control it, and thus suffered a lot from the side effects, such as soul damages or even soul missing. In other words, vegetative or dementia. Zhang Han had innumerable experience and could control the spiritual force with great precision, so he dared to use this method. After the spiritual qi entered his mind, Zhang Han suddenly felt a blank in his brain. When he regained consciousness, he had successfully opened his soul sense C. However, the 2 or 3 wisps of light fog flying in his soul sense C were all the soul sense that Zhang Han got. Puff. As Zhang Han exhaled and opened his eyes, a green light flashed slightly across his eyes. He stood up and there was a crackle of firecrackers within his body. The early stage of building base with a 5-inch danshan. What a pity I haven't advanced to the best building base stage. Zhang Han shook his head slightly. The spiritual qi here could have helped him advance to the middle stage of building base, and most of the cultivators would make such a choice. But Zhang Han chose the other way as advancing to the best stage of building base. It's time to refine my weapons, Zhang Han said to himself, slightly flapping his hands, letting the spiritual force break out of his body. Suddenly, the fire cloud stone on the table flew over and fell into the 5 elements furnace. Zhang Han's palm moved again, and the 18 black cards fell into the furnace. Jade. There were still nearly 100 pieces of jade left. Zhang Han waved his hand gently and turned them into a spirit-breaking formation in 3 seconds. All the jade was broken one by one and turned into energy. With Zhang Han's spiritual force, they condensed into a fire of energy and began to refine the fire cloud stone. About 5 hours later, the fire cloud stone was refined into gas, and constantly integrated into the cards. Refine. Suddenly, Zhang Han's eyes lit up. His soul sense came out of his body as he began to refine the cards with his psychokinesis. 10 seconds later, the fire of energy dissipated. Instead of using his spiritual force, Zhang Han just controlled the 18 cards with his spiritual sense mind trick and let them fly out one by one and fall into his hands. Zhang Han had refined the cards with his soul sense and made them his own weapon. Therefore, under the control of Zhang Han's spiritual force, these cards were now much stronger in attack. It's time to go. Zhang Han thought for a while, then decided to leave the stone house with the 5 elements furnace. He would be gone for a few days, and the 5 elements furnace might be lost if he left it here. It would be safer to put it on Mount New Moon. So Zhang Han left the wreck and floated to the sea surface. At this time, the sun had just risen and it was about 8 o'clock. Then, Zhang Han sank down into the sea and swam back to Mount New Moon at a high speed. It had taken him more than 3 hours to get there, but only half the time to get back. Back on the mountain, he put the 5 elements furnace under the Thunder Yang tree. Zhang Han took out his mobile phone and turned it on. Ding! When the phone was turned on, it showed that it was 10 o'clock. Zhang Han had spent more than 2 days in the stone house. Zhang Han pondered and dialed Ziyan's number. At this time, the cell phone kept ringing with the low power alert. Doot. The phone was connected, but when Zhang Han was about to speak, beep, the phone automatically shut down because the battery was low. Zhang Han sighed and walked directly from the forest to the international airport. He went straight, even faster than driving, and got to the airport in half an hour. He bought a ticket for an 11:30 flight. Then he sat in the waiting room and looked out of the window. Just as the last few check-in reminders rang, Zhang Han stood up, but suddenly stopped. At the entrance of the airport, there was a group of familiar cars. A figure ran out of the first car and stumbled a few steps. Then she took off her high-heeled shoes and ran in quickly. Zhang Han was stunned. He gave up on checking in and walked to the door of the waiting room. When he was about to get to the door, he heard over the intercom, "The check-in time for Xihang is over." He walked out of the entrance of the airport and was moved by the scene in front of him. That woman belonged to him. She was looking at the plane that was about to take off with a pale face. When she was about to cry, a soft voice came from the entrance. "Sweetheart." Swish. As she turned around and saw Zhang Han, her eyes widened and tears came down. Then she rushed to Zhang Han. She rushed into Zhang Han's arms and cried. They hugged each other tightly. At this moment, Zhang Han felt peaceful. This morning, when Zhao Feng finished a series of calls, at about 9 o'clock, Mr. Sheng arrived. He took his notebook and connected it to Ziyan's cell phone. After half an hour of crackling on the keyboard, Mr. Sheng gave them some exciting news. "Let's go to the Beach Blossom Hotel," Zhang Li said hurriedly. "Mr. Sheng, please do me another favor," Zhao Feng said with a wry smile. "Okay, I enjoyed the delicious food the other day, so I'd like to help." Mr. Sheng smiled and nodded. Thank you." Zhao Feng thanked him repeatedly. Finally, they went out together to the Beach Blossom Hotel. It was 10 a.m. when they arrived. There were more than 20 people in the top floor party hall, including Hong Kitao, Tang Jie, Hong Li, Ninai, Chu Hui, and some other friends of Liang Hao, 2 board members of the Royal Entertainment Company, Wu Chengdong and Makey on crutches, and some others whose names were not known to Zhao Feng. The scene in front of them made them feel depressed. About 11 o'clock, Liang Hao and Liang Mengkai came in. He was dressed in a suit, greeted several people, and said with a smile, "Ziyan will come right away, please wait a moment." When passing by Zhang Li, Liang Hao smiled and was about to say something. Zhang Li said indifferently, "Shame on you. Don't talk to me." Swish. Liang Hao was stunned, while others who heard Zhang Li's words were all puzzled, especially Chu Hui, who said with a smile, "That's strange. Has Liang Hao offended her?" Standing beside him, Liang Mengkai looked at Zhang Li and whispered, "You will understand later." Liang Hao's mouth trembled slightly. Actually, Liang Hao was amused by Zhang Li's impoliteness. Liang Hao wanted to say something, but gave up in the end. Mr. Sheng in the back looked at him and Zhang Li strangely. Zhang Li glared at Liang Hao, then turned away from him. Liang Hao didn't say anything at last. He gave a wry smile and went inside. There was a small stage on the innermost side. Liang Hao stepped onto the stage and looked at the door on the right when Ziyan and Zif came in. Ziyan stepped onto the stage in a simple white dress and sunglasses. Liang Hao nodded to her with a smile. Zhang Li was going mad. But the next moment, Liang Hao's words made Zhang Li stupefied. "Hello, I'm Liang Hao. The purpose of this banquet is..." Liang Hao looked at Zhang Li and said, "Ziyan is leaving Hong Kong for Singapore, and she wanted to get together with you before she leaves." These words shocked Zhao Feng and others. It was a party, not an engagement. They were tricked. But it also gave them complete relief. Zhang Li's eyes were no longer so fierce, and she just stared at Liang Hao again. "Who came up with this bad idea of fooling and troubling us? If I catch him, I will definitely punish him and not let him eat the membership meal." Liang Mengkai suddenly shivered. If she knew Zhang Li's thoughts, she would regret that she had come up with this plan. Wasn't it because she'd seen too many soap operas? Was the punishment too severe? In fact, after going back to discuss it with Liang Hao last night, her plan was rejected. After Liang Hao said something, Tang Jie asked, "Yan, why are you leaving? Won't you stay in Hong Kong for another period of time?" "Aunt Tang, you can't go." A voice interrupted her. Zhang Li hurried in. "Who said my sister-in-law was leaving?" "My sister-in-law won't leave. Come with me, sister-in-law." Zhang Li took Ziyan by the arm to the back of the crowd. At this time, everyone looked at them curiously. They didn't know what happened, but they knew there was a private talk, because they were all standing at the back. Many of them began chatting with each other, while the others kept staring at the two women with curiosity. "This is Mr. Sheng, the chairman of a new technology. He is also the most famous hacker. Mr. Sheng has something to say to you." "Well, just tell her the truth." Zhao Feng looked at Mr. Sheng and reminded him. Mr. Sheng looked at Zhao Feng in surprise, for he was not used to be introduced as a hacker. "How did you know my identity?" "That, my instructor told me. I'm a little worried. Please forgive me, Mr. Sheng," Zhao Feng said apologetically. "Oh." Mr. Sheng nodded, looked at Ziyan, took her cell phone, handed it over and said, "Hello, Miss Ziyan." Ziyan was at a loss. Seeing Mr. Sheng holding her mobile phone, she looked at Zif, but she soon thought of Mr. Sheng's identity, and her heart leapt slightly as there was a hope that rose in despair. "Hello, Mr. Sheng." Ziyan said hello and looked at him eagerly. "I checked your phone and recovered the deleted files. After my inspection, the photos are genuine, but there are 5 photos taken more than 5 years ago, 4 photos taken a year ago, and only 2 photos taken at the door a few days ago. As for the video, the sound is synthetic, and there is not only one man in these photos. I think you understand what I mean. The specific information has been sent to your email. If you are interested, you can download it and have a look at the details," Mr. Sheng said. "Really, really?" It could be seen through the sunglasses that Ziyan's eyes slowly widened. Her heart beat faster and harder. "I don't think it's necessary for me to deceive you. Okay, it's settled. I'm going to go on my vacation. Everyone, goodbye." With that, Mr. Sheng left without any hesitation. At this time, the crowd turned their gaze to Xian. What should I do? Xian's voice was choked up and trembling. Her mind was in a mess. But the next moment, Xian, a sad voice suddenly came from the door. A woman in a mask and sunglasses came in. Who is she? Zhao Feng thought of something, and his attitude became unfriendly. Xian also realized who was coming. She bit the tip of her tongue and forced herself to calm down. Soon after, the woman came near and stared at Xian silently. Who are you? Zhang Li asked. I'm Qiao Luo. Qiao Luo smiled and shook her head, slowly took off her sunglasses and mask, and then raised her head. At this time, her face was black and blue, even her left eye was swollen. Apparently, she had been beaten violently. Knowing that she was Qiao Luo, Xian paused her breathing and looked serious. You win. Suddenly, Qiao Luo opened her mouth, smiled miserably, shook her head, and said, but it is your husband's identity that defeated me. I underestimated him. I didn't expect that he would grow up to be the one I would need to look up to, and the one that my Qiao family would be afraid of. You are his weakness. I want to get revenge on him, but I couldn't find a way to break through to him before I thought of you. You are so important to him. My direction was right, but it's a pity that I chose the wrong person. In order to deal with you, I found 3 psychologists. I've seen all the films and TV works you've ever made. I've seen all the information about you that can be found on the internet. I've studied your psychology. According to the method you used, the photo information has been modified by 2 post-production masters. You must have selected the 2nd, 4th, and 11th photos. Only 3 photos, right? Fake. It's all fake. I lost everything. I'm not even part of the Qiao lineage. I can't come back to Hong Kong for many years, but I have to come and apologize to you. Maybe you know the rules of the entertainment circle, but you can't beat me in the business war. But I just lost. I'm not willing. Qiao Luo put her sunglasses and mask back on. Now what do you want to say? When Qiao Luo was about to leave, Xian said without emotion, you are wrong. Evil will be rewarded with evil. Your evil intention, schemes, and intrigues are definitely not the reason for your success. Now, please leave. Zhao Feng took a step forward and looked at Qiao Luo. Please. Qiao Luo turned, looked down, and left. After she left, Xian's body swayed and she felt a little lack of oxygen. Zif hurriedly helped Xian and asked anxiously, are you okay, Sister Yan? Xian's shoulders trembled, and her choking was heartbreaking. What should I do? Where is he? Why hasn't he come to me? Where is he? What can I do? He must be very upset. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. Looking at Xian, who was out of control, Zhang Li was a little worried and said, don't worry, sister-in-law. It's okay. My brother called in the morning. Huh? Xian looked up, grabbed Zhang Li's arm, and asked, where is he? I'm going to find him. I'm going now. Zhang Li was at a loss over what to do. Not knowing what to do, she asked the silent Zhao Feng for help. Can't you talk? Don't be like wood. The argument here made a lot of people in the hall look over. It seemed that something had happened. Liang Hao gave them a wry smile and stepped over. But at this time, a man rushed in. It was Instructor Liu. There's news from the boss. There's news. When I got downstairs, I got a call from my man. The boss just bought a flight to Xihang, and it will leave at 11:30, said Instructor Liu. Kaboom! Xian began shivering. He left me. He is going to leave Hong Kong. I must have broken his heart. No, I can't let him go. I can't live without him. It's 11 o'clock now. It's not too late. Zhao Feng looked at his watch and said, let's go, Xin said in a trembling voice, while Liang Hao walked 5 meters away, raised his hand, and was about to say something. He saw a group of people running out of the room. He slowly turned his head and let out an embarrassed smile, saying, well, in fact, I just wanted you to get together. I understand, Hong Kitao said with a smile. Tang Jie was experienced and seemed to understand something. This was a couple who was in conflict, and the wife was so angry that she wanted to leave Hong Kong. However, all the unhappiness would be forgotten. The others also smiled and shook their heads without saying much about it. They decided to take the opportunity to have a party here. Ziyan was in a hurry. While Zhao Feng was driving, Zhang Li and Zif sat in the back with Ziyan. Instructor Liu, Ahu downstairs, Leng Yi and others drove their Mercedes to the international airport. Instructor Liu made a few phone calls, so all they encountered along the way were green lights. They arrived at the airport at 11:15. At this time, everyone was relieved because Instructor Liu had informed the airport staff to stop Zhang Han when they saw him. However, Ziyan had no idea of time now. Her heart ached. She was worrying about Zhang Han. She knew Zhang Han had to be sad. She was blaming herself. All the moments she had shared with Zhang Han were flashing through her mind. Hand in hand skating on the square, going shopping, taking a cruise, climbing Mount New Moon, surfing, racing car, and going to bars. In a short period of time, they had made many sweet memories. She also thought of the corner of Royal Entertainment Company, where he gently extended his hand to her. He had to be very sad, but he comforted her tenderly and did not blame her. It's all my fault, it's all my fault. After arriving at the airport, Ziyan got out of the car in a hurry. After a few steps, she failed to control her high heels and sprained her foot. Her feet hurt a little, but she didn't care. Instead, she kicked her shoes off. She ran barefoot to the airport. Don't leave me. You can't leave. Ziyan was shouting in silence. When she ran to the front of the waiting room, what she heard was a warning of the end of the check-in period. She had forgotten that the end of the check-in period didn't mean that the plane had already taken off. Just then, a plane took off. Ziyan looked up and was at a loss. Her mind went blank and her heart was twitching violently. At this time, a soft voice with affection came into her ear from the side. Sweetheart? Him. It's him. Ziyan turned her head slowly and her eyes widened. He was smiling gently. His eyes were full of tenderness. Ziyan could no longer control her emotions. She rushed to Zhang Han and threw herself into his arms. She began crying like a wronged child. She was crying loudly. You can't go. You can't leave me. I was wrong. Ziyan said a few words vaguely, and then she devoted herself to the crying of embracing happiness. This scene shocked the surrounding passengers. They looked at the two embracing each other without knowing why. What's the matter? There were even a lot of people passing by who thought it was a handsome man and a beautiful woman's love problems, and they wanted to wait and see. However, step back. Nearly 20 men in black suits surrounded the venue from afar. Don't look, don't take photos. Under the threat of these people, most of the onlookers turned their heads and felt themselves very impolite. Alas, 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 Zif said with a sigh 3 times, it's over. Yes, it's over. I've been worried these days. Zhang Li also sighed, and then asked, by the way, who came up with the idea of the engagement? Huh? We didn't sleep last night. Was it you? How could it be me? It was Liang Meng Kai. Huh? Did she watch too many soap operas? I'm so angry that I won't let her eat in the future, said Zhang Li. Ah, she has seen many soap operas, but she is also kind. She has been comforting Sister Yan these days. Later, she thought this plan was not appropriate, so she just told you that they were getting engaged, while the others all knew it was a party. Zif shook her head and said, HMPH, stupid girl. Zhang Li snorted. But it was really dangerous. Sister Yan was indeed planning to go back to Singapore, said Zif with lingering fear. She couldn't go back before, but now she can. Just take my brother with her. It's time for my brother to propose marriage. Since Meng Meng was born many years ago, they have to hurry to get married, Zhang Li said like an adult. Brother Zhang Han and Sister Ziyan will be happy for good. Liu King smiled shyly. While looking at the two people in front of her admiringly, she said to herself, "This picture is like a romantic movie. I envy them so much that I want to cry like this. Lily, I am hungry. I haven't eaten a meal made by my brother-in-law in several days. I've lost 5 kilos these days. Can you believe it?" Zuf said with some pain. "What does it have to do with me whether you are thin or not?" Zhang Li rolled her eyes. "Lily, you will have no friends. I'm kidding, all right, they've made up, and we'll have a delicious meal soon. I'm hungry, too. In fact, I am also hungry," Liu King whispered. "You shouldn't have reminded me, now I'm hungry, too." Zhao Feng smiled. "It seems that hunger is infectious. I'm hungry, too." Instructor Liu sighed. Chapter 393, The Little Red Riding Hood was finally. Instructor Liu and the others looked around for a moment before turning to maintain order within the surrounding area. They could vacate a large space, but they couldn't effect the order of the airport. Many of the airport staff were already there, directing the guests to walk to the waiting room on the side. Instructor Liu talked to a near security official. He looked at the center of the airfield and grinned, asking, "How long will it take?" "I don't know, it should. Maybe it will take a little while." Instructor Liu waved his hand. Xian hugged Zhang Han tightly while crying heavily. The emotions of the past few days that had accumulated in her heart had finally turned to tears and were pouring out. Whispering softly in her ear, Zhang Han gently caressed the back of Xian's head with his left hand and patted her back with his right. "All right, stop crying, be a good girl." Xian calmed a little and said in a choked voice, I was so stupid. I was cheated. I'm sorry if I've upset you. It's okay, it's all in the past." Zhang Han continued to comfort her. "I just feel so sorry for you. Please, stop crying. But I should have believed you. It's all right, you're my precious wife. This is not your fault." Zhang Han affectionately touched Xian's head. He whispered, "Those people were so cunning, others would also be deceived." With Zhang Han comforting her, Xian slowly stopped crying. She innocently looked up at Zhang Han, slightly pouted her red lips and muttered, "So, you don't blame me now?" Zhang Han chuckled and said, "Why should I blame you? You are so nice." Xian hugged Zhang Han once again and whispered in his ear, "Please don't be upset. I love you, my husband." Oh my God! Zhang Han seemed to be immersed in the warmth of his wife's love and his heart grew tenderer and tenderer. That was the first time that Xian had called him her husband. Zhang Han leaned backwards. He stared at her before extending his right hand to gently touch her red and swollen eyes, wiping away her tears. His eyes were full of tenderness, and she slowly closed hers. Then, Zhang Han lowered his head and kissed her red lips. With her arms wrapped around Zhang Han's neck, Xian responded to his kiss. Ahem! Instructor Liu, Zhang Li and the others turned their heads, with all of them breaking into a smile. Those days were also difficult for them. Fortunately, everything was getting better now. After kissing for a few seconds more, they stopped. Xian slightly raised her head, staring at Zhang Han. She bit her lower lip lightly, her eyes once again filling with tears. "Come on, stop crying, everything is all right," Zhang Han said with a chuckle. Xian responded, but it seemed that the teardrops just wouldn't stop falling. Zhang Han finally understood what others mean when they said that women were made of water. After thinking about it, Zhang Han said, "Do you know that I have another identity?" "What is that?" Xian blinked her eyes and began to think, which made her stop crying. After thinking for 5 seconds, Xian said, "Are you, Master Zhang?" While talking with Tang Jie 2 days ago, Xian learned that Master Zhang had gotten very angry with the men who hurt his lover and killed 13 people. The incident made him very well known in the town. However, Xian was too upset back then and didn't think much of it. She knew that the name Master represented a man who was very good at martial arts, but she didn't understand its specific meaning. "No," said Zhang Han, slowly shaking his head. "Then what is it?" Xian began to think again. I will give you a hint. Zhang Han smiled slightly and said, I love you, love you, love you. Xian was surprised. She opened her mouth and said softly, I love you, too. Zhang Han found her so cute. Touching her head, he said, I'll give you another hint. All right, I'll be more straightforward. I love you, I love you. Doesn't that sound a little familiar? Think about it. Ah? Xian was stunned, as if she had thought of something. Her eyes suddenly widened as she asked, are you also, Han Yang? Looking at the cute girl standing before him, Zhang Han grinned and said, it would be such a coincidence, right? Those songs are my second birthday present to you. Swish. A blush rose in her pretty cheeks as she finally realized who he was. Then, she threw herself into Zhang Han's arms, bouncing while saying, wow, you're so nice, it's so good to have you. Xian was deeply moved. The mixed feelings of self-accusation and upset slowly dissipated. Instead, her heart was filled with a great happiness. Yes, with such a great man as Zhang Han, how could she not be happy? Ha ha ha. Zhang Han laughed happily, then giving Xian a princess hug. They walked outside. Xian's arms were wrapped around Zhang Han's neck with her head resting on his warm chest. It was so sweet. All right, it's done, escort them. Instructor Liu shouted. Everyone moved, making way for them. Zhang Li, Zif and Liu King looked at Zhang Han warmly. They finally made up. They followed behind them. After they walked downstairs, Zhang Han proceeded straight to the leading Mercedes-Benz, with Xian in his arms. Zhao Feng stood at the back with the others, but he didn't make any move to drive the car, because he didn't know what the boss was thinking. But when he saw Zhang Han put Xian in the front passenger seat, he hurriedly asked someone to get the car keys and handed them to his boss. Zhang Han took the car keys and nodded before taking the driver's seat. Then, Zif approached the rear of the car. She was about to open the door when she was interrupted. What are you doing? You've always been a third wheel. Zhang Li grabbed Zif. A third wheel? I'm not stupid. I just want to put Xian's high heels and handbags in there. Zif rolled her eyes. Even if she was stupid, she wouldn't dream of being a third wheel for them at such a moment. Oh, just go ahead. Zhang Li smiled and let her go. After thinking for a second, Zif opened the front passenger's door. She put the high heels on the mat and handed the bag to Xian. After seeing Zhang Han getting in the car, Zif smiled and said, you can come back very late tonight. Enjoy the world of just you two. DSK, DSK. She closed the door quickly and stepped back. The Mercedes-Benz slowly left the airport. Where should we go? Zhang Li asked. Let's go and eat. I'm starving, Zif said. There is a banquet in the Peach Blossom Hotel. Would you like to have some food there? I don't want to eat the food at other places. Zhang Li shook her head again and again. Then let's go to the company, Zhao Feng said. I'll ask someone to roast 2 whole sheep. Let's go, hurry up, Instructor Liu said impatiently. Oh right, let's go to Union Garden first to pick up Meng Meng. We should make some porridge for her, as well as milk and boiled eggs. She can't eat too much roast lamb, Zif added. Are the boss and his wife not going to pick up Meng Meng? Instructor Liu asked. Every couple needs time together after quarreling and making up. You're single, you wouldn't understand that, said Zif, curling her lips in scorn. All right, then we'll go there. Instructor Liu smiled bitterly. It sounds like you understand that all too well. Aren't you single as well? With that, they all got into their cars and prepared to go to the Eastern District of South Island to pick up Meng Meng before returning to the company. The reality was similar to what Zif has said. As the Mercedes left the airport, Xian had watched Zhang Han all the way. Her eyes were full of love, as if she could never see enough of him. After arriving at the ring road around the Western District, Xian looked at the signs and then asked softly, where are we going? We are going to pick up Meng Meng. He hadn't seen Meng Meng for a few days, so he had really missed her. What he wanted more than anything was to stay with Xian and Meng quietly. But Xian licked her lips and said, how about we pick her up later? I wanted to just be us for a while. Zhang Han was surprised. If he didn't understand her meaning, he must be a moron. His eyes filled with excitement, he said, should we tell Zif first? Xian took her phone out of her bag and dialed Zif's number. After a simple talk with Zif, she learned that they were on their way to pick up Meng, so she hung up the phone. Putting the phone back in her bag, she raised her head as a blush bloomed on her pretty face. The car had already entered the hotel parking lot. When they arrived, Zhang Han got out of the car quickly and went straight to the passenger side. He opened the door and took Xian's hand, before they both hurriedly entered the hotel. They quickly got the keycard for the honeymoon suite. They rushed to the elevator, waited for their floor, and then entered their hotel room. His actions were natural and smooth. At that moment Xian became silent, her eyes filled with tenderness. There was a large pink heart-shaped bed in the middle of the room. After opening the door and turning on the soft-colored light, Zhang Han held Xian tightly in his arms and his lips met hers. Still kissing, they slowly moved to the bed. Zhang Han pressed Xian under his body and stared at her. Xian's eyes were filled with love. Both her expression and actions told him that she was ready. Neither of them spoke. After looking at each other for another 5 seconds, Zhang Han kissed her again. Just like that, the atmosphere in the room seemed to grow more intimate. Soon, one by one, Zhang Han's windbreaker, t-shirt and pants were thrown on the carpet next to the bed. Followed by Xian's dress and underwear. One by one. Gradually, the two of them were naked and embraced each other tightly. There was fire within their hearts. The time was ripe. Xian made a satisfied sound. Their love wasn't only platonic. They took each other deeply and thoroughly. As Xian made more sounds, Zhang Han also made a low sound, as if all the cells and all the bones in his body were satisfied. So, in that way, the battle in the romantic room continued quietly. It became hotter and hotter. Zhang Han didn't notice that the spiritual force within his body was gradually being divided into several wisps and then gathered by Xian's body. They began to rotate. Suddenly, Xian's body seemed to contain numerous rays of light that turned into a long stream, gathering at her abdomen. A bright circle like the moon slowly formed. They were unaware of how much time had passed as they had become completely intoxicated by their romance. Pleasant voices rang around the room. When they had reached the peak, Zhang Han made a low sound. Kaboom! They were suddenly unconscious, as if they had fallen into an endless space and they were lost. Just then, Zhang Han felt that a very bright moon was born. A huge moon rising in the endless world. It was bursting with brilliance and the light spread over everything. It was so strange that even Zhang Han did not know what was happening. However, something had quietly changed inside his body. It seemed that some unknown energy had appeared out of thin air and was constantly piercing Zhang Han's abdomen. Kaboom! He heard it. He felt it. A slight muffled sound rang in his abdomen. The sound represented 6 inches in the abdomen. The excellent building base. However, that energy seemed to be endless. Kaboom! 7 inches in the abdomen. Kaboom! 8 inches in the abdomen. Kaboom! 9 inches in the abdomen. The perfect building base. The perfect building base. Zhang Han was amazed. He could barely comprehend what he was seeing. The moon dimmed, but it was still so dazzling. How did I get the perfect building base? I didn't even have the best building base. To achieve 9 inches into the abdomen required the perfect building base. I'll need a lot of resources. Zhang Han was confused. Whoosh! Suddenly, the moon bloomed like the sun, which was blinding. Kaboom! Another muffled sound was heard. Another inch was achieved in his abdomen. 10 inches into the abdomen. Zhang Han was amazed. What's going on? Is it a dream? No, it isn't a dream. However, 9 is the maximum. 9 inches into the abdomen would create the perfect building base. But what would 10 inches bring? Oh, I understand. The perfect building base is just a name, it's like a barrier. Cultivation means getting through the barriers one by one, right? I got it, 9 is the maximum, but it turns out that in this world, there are things that exceed the maximum. Just when Zhang Han was about to figure it out, the moon suddenly stopped shining and slowly dissipated. Then, Zhang Han regained consciousness. When he could see again, what he saw was the room. There was still sweat on his and Xian's body after the romance. Zhang Han checked his spiritual force, and then, a very complicated smile appeared on his face. The surging spiritual force that flowed through his abdomen had experienced a qualitative change, was even stronger than the perfect building base in his last life. After the shackles had been broken, rays of light seemed to inadvertently flash around his abdomen. If they were enlarged, they would look like meteors. Zhang Han didn't know the reason why. However, he knew that it was great news. 10 inches into the abdomen, he was much stronger than before. Just then, Xian's eyebrows trembled. She slowly opened her eyes and stared at Zhang Han. She was a little shy, but said softly, "You're amazing." "Ah, was it too fast?" Zhang Han asked with hesitation. "No, it was wonderful." Zhang Han looked at the time. "Oh, an hour and a half has passed. It wasn't so fast." He smiled a little awkwardly. It could be said that he had held it for many years. What's more, the feeling that Xian brought out in him had made him quite sensitive. It was just that something very mysterious had happened, but he had already forgotten its feeling. "Honey, there is a secret in your body." Zhang Han leaned sideways. He held Xian in his arms and said with a smile, "I can't detect your abdomen. You said that you have little chance of having a baby. It seems to be because of that. In addition, I've experienced a great breakthrough, which is what you gave me." "Really? I helped you to make a great breakthrough. What is it?" Xian said with a smile. After making love, Xian hadn't gained the ability to be a martial artist, but she felt better. Her red, swollen eyes had recovered. Compared to her, Zhang Han had gained much more. From 6 inches to 10 inches into the abdomen, he had achieved something that was better than the perfect building base. Zhang Han felt like he was dreaming. The surprise arrived suddenly. Zhang Han was still pondering Xian's question. Did someone transfer that energy to Xian, or was she born with such a precious body? No matter what it is, it seems that it wasn't a bad thing at all. As for the secret, I'll figure it out after my strength is improved. After thinking for a while, he still couldn't figure it out. After hearing the question, he hesitated and then said, "I plan to tell you about it when you see it with your own eyes later, but I guess I'll say it now. I'm actually a reborn cultivator." "Ah? A cultivator? What is that? Is it an immortal?" she said in surprise. Her eyes were wide open. "It refers to a person who pursues immortality. There are many ways to cultivate. Going to the extreme of each way may help the cultivator to break through and become immortal. How about this? Let me show you, and you'll know." Zhang Han held Xian with his left hand and gently moved his right hand. Zoom. The 18 cards that were in Zhang Han's pocket flew out in sequence. With the control of his mind, Zhang Han presented different patterns to Xian. Cultivators have the ability to detach themselves from the world. They're powerful and capable. They can smash mountains, destroy cities, kill demons, and so on, by thousands of methods. As their capability improves, they grow stronger and stronger. They can even fly or walk under the ground. They live an endless life, just as the sun and the moon does, or the heavens and the earth. This is what a cultivator is. Xian was stunned by his words. She looked at the man in front of her as her whole worldview collapsed. After 10 minutes, Xian came to and said, "So, my husband is an immortal?" Not now. I still have a long way to go. I'm just getting started." Zhang Han found her question very funny. "Wow, you're so powerful," Xian screamed. Then, feeling a little lost, she said, "You're so powerful, but I'm just an ordinary person. I can only accompany you in this life. After 10 years, I'll be older and ugly. How is that possible?" Zhang Han waved his right hand and put the cards back into his pocket. Then, he put his fingers on Xian's lips and said, "You will definitely cultivate in the future. You'll stay young and beautiful forever. We'll live happily together and we'll always be a couple. We'll be together forever and ever." Xian's voice trembled and she asked, Can I? Of course, you won't only be able to do it, but you will do it well. Although I don't understand it now, your body holds a big secret, which made me break through many levels. Maybe you'll be more powerful than your husband in the future, Zhang Han said with a smile. However, he didn't expect his words to come true until the future. Really? Then let's be together forever, Xian said happily. Right, first I should remind you, you must believe me no matter what you see in the future, because in addition to deception, there are a lot of things in the world that can mix the genuine with the false. I promise I'll always believe you. I won't question you, Xian said seriously. Zhang Han was a little bit tempted by the expression on her face. Thinking for a moment, he said, "Let me show you. First, close your eyes and empty yourself. Don't think about anything." Then, Xian obediently closed her eyes. Zhang Han touched Xian's pretty cheeks with his palm. With light flashing through his eyes, the soul sense reached out and penetrated Xian's mind. Boom! Xian suddenly felt everything change, as if she was traveling through time. She found herself on a prairie, while Zhang Han was happily riding a horse. Meng was standing directly in front of her. Boom! The scene changed again. It was when she and Zhang Han were surfing together. It seemed that there was the sound of running water all around her and she could touch the sea with her hands. "Okay, open your eyes." Then, the scene disappeared. Zhang Han's voice rang in her ear. Xian opened her eyes and looked at Zhang Han with confusion, saying, "It felt so strange, it seemed so real." Xian lay in Zhang Han's arms like a kitten. "Honey, I wouldn't believe it even if I saw it with my own eyes later. I know that you only love me," she said softly. "Yes, I only love you." Zhang Han smiled gently. You said that you were reborn. Then tell me what happened in your previous life. I'm interested." Xian muttered. "Okay." Zhang Han held her in his arms and began to recall his past, while saying slowly, "It's a long story. I entered the cultivation world accidentally. It was also in Shangjing that I was driven out of the Zhang family. I had a hard life for 5 years and was injured. I finally left for Mount Kunlun. I was at a loss and didn't know how many days I had walked. I felt that there was a fog all around me and I forgot about time. Finally, I jumped off a cliff. I didn't know anything about the cultivation world at the beginning, so I was very vigilant and didn't dare to believe anyone. Gradually, after I learned more and with the awakening of treasure-sniffing nose, when I was experiencing the tribulation, even the sacred thunder was attracted. When I came back, I was on Mount Langsing at Shangjing, just like that. Even with Zhang Han briefly telling her about his experience, it cost him more than 2 hours. When she heard Zhang Han had tried to kill himself, Xian's eyes reddened. When it came to the breathtaking part, she screamed and felt as if she was right there. After that, Xian knew everything. No wonder he can play the piano so well. Turns out that he's practiced for hundreds of years. Oh. He also gave me songs secretly and did so many things silently. Xian felt very happy deep inside. My husband is an immortal, you're my guardian. Xian bit her lower lip, expressing her love through her eyes. Hiss. Zhang Han was tempted and his body trembled, feeling that it was time for him to show his ability again. So, his hands began to move while he said with a smile, "I just didn't fully enjoy it. Let's do it again." Their bodies came together once again and they were fully immersed in their deep love. It seemed that they would continue the romance, not returning home until evening. Although it was not the first time, they could finally fully enjoy the feeling of making love. They were just like a blazing fire and dry wood. Just when Zhang Han and Xian were enjoying their romantic time, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, some breaking news was heard in the martial arts world in Hong Kong. After He Qingshan returned to Hong Kong and learned that He Yanfei had been killed, he was furious and asked the man named Zhang to travel to Strange Peak Island within 3 days, otherwise, his whole family would be killed. An hour after that, Lieutenant of the National Security Agency also sent a message that Zhang Han was a special protector of the agency and He Yanfei's death wasn't related to him, so he wasn't responsible. Many people understood that from his tough attitude he wanted to protect Master Zhang. What's more, Master Zhang was the protector of the National Safety Agency and was known by the martial arts world. He had killed 13 people, but was still treated like that. It seemed that he was indeed a powerful person. Many people couldn't help but gasp in astonishment. However, He Qingshan was not afraid. He said that anyone who hurt his men should be killed. He also asked the so-called Protector Zhang to meet him in 1 day's time. Lieutenant replied with a tough stance, "It's absolutely impossible." Neither of them wanted to compromise, so, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Lieutenant and He Qingshan agreed to fight at Strange Peak Island the next day. Since no one wanted to take a step back, they would just fight each other there. That was the martial artist's way of solving things. In the end, it turned out to be a battle between the two big shots in the martial arts world of Hong Kong, which raised a colossal uproar. The entire martial arts world was shocked. Chapter 394, The Itinerary. Lieutenant firmly chose to protect Zhang Han this time. As for Lieutenant, He Qingshan planned to compete against him. It just so happened that he had comprehended a killing move during the period when he had meditated in seclusion, so he wanted to make Lieutenant try it out. Zhang Han, however, as the center of all these controversies, was enjoying a wonderful life and doing wild things at that moment. He looked at Xian beneath him, who was both tender and charming, and wanted to cherish this feeling alone. On the other side, in the Peach Blossom Hotel, this banquet, as a farewell dinner, had been agreed by Xian, but now, it obviously turned into a joke. Because the people present were all familiar with each other, they naturally were not annoyed, but treated it as an opportunity to gather together. When Liang Mengkai was about to have dinner, she received a call from Zhao Feng, who asked her if she would like to eat a whole roast lamb with him. As a foodie who had not had access to the dishes of the restaurant for several days, she certainly would not decline his invitation. "Brother, there's something delicious, a whole roast lamb. They are cooking it in Meng Meng Security. Shall we go there to eat later?" Liang Mengkai ran up to Liang Hao and said, "Okay, let's go there after this banquet ends." Liang Hao nodded. In the hall, the first to leave were the two people who got along well with Hong Kitao in the Royal Entertainment Company, then Tang Jie and her companions also left in succession. After finishing greeting, Liang Hao went to the corner and sat in front of Chu Hu. The two of them picked up their glasses and clinked them together. Then, Liang Hao said with a smile, "Xian has gone to see the boss, and she seems to be staying here. After they reconcile with each other, you can come to the boss's restaurant to taste the dishes there as well. He is really good at cooking." "Okay, I will be free in a few days, and at that time, I'll accompany you. Why didn't you tell me that Xian is your friend? Do you remember the Master Zhang that I mentioned before? He's Xian's husband with formidable power." Chu Hui said before drinking the wine in the glass that was held in his hand. Suddenly, poof! A large mouthful of tea sprayed on Chu Hui's face. Even the glass in his hand was seemingly caught in the rain. Chu Hui stared at Liang Hao, dumbfounded. "What are you doing? Couldn't you have sprayed it on the ground?" Even Liang Mengkai, next to Liang Hao, was totally startled. She looked at Chu Hu and glanced at Liang Hao several times, then curled her lips. "You washed his face. Sorry." Liang Hao rushed to take some tissues and handed them to Chu Hu, then apologized. "This news came as such a shock. I need to wash my face." Chu Hu was a little embarrassed, so he got up and went to the bathroom. Liang Hao shook his head and sighed. It turns out to be him who can settle the Heaven Stage Masters. He still remembered that he put on a cool face in face of Zhang Han and told him not to live at ease. As a result, Zhang Han unexpectedly was Master Zhang. Liang Hao felt completely embarrassed at the thought of it. Soon after, Xuanhuan came back and talked with him for a while. After almost all the people left, they also left. Liang Hao drove his Escalade to New Moon Bay. When he arrived at the company, he saw that the whole roast lamb was almost ready to be cooked in an open space on the right side of the square. There were about 40 people in total sitting in the temporary chairs at the tables on the left side of the whole roast lamb. As for Meng, she was sitting in the middle where the crowd was the thickest. The little gal was mad with joy as she learned that Papa and Mama were negotiating to live back at the restaurant. Besides that, the people surrounding her were playing with her. Here you are. Catching sight of Liang Mengkai, Zhao stood up to meet her. He brought Liang Mengkai and Liang Hao, then asked them to sit down. Zhang Li gave an angry stare to Liang Mengkai and scolded her. Liang Mengkai, you're so awesome. Liang Mengkai, you actually imitated what is shown on soap operas. Did you know that we couldn't sleep for several days? Upon hearing what she said, Liang Mengkai's face crinkled and she asked for mercy. Ouch, I was anxious when finding that Sister Xian was really aggrieved, so that I gave her some advice. That's right, we discussed it with each other before we decided. Liang Hao explained. Before he finished speaking, Zhang Li rolled her eyes at him and said, Don't talk to me, I will be annoyed on seeing you. Well, Auntie Lili feels annoyed the moment she sees you. Meng added as her eyes widened, Auntie Lili is only tired of you, not others. Ha. Liang Hao put on a frustrated look. Ha ha. Zhang Li burst out laughing. In fact, she was not really angry with Liang Mengkai and Liang Hao, even if she stayed up the whole night, but all her emotions floated in the wind since her brother and sister-in-law were reconciled. Won't you do something to compensate us? Zhang Li said while staring at the two of them. Well, what do you want us to do? Liang Hao asked with a smile. Just have a glass of wine, Zhang Li said casually. Ha ha, I'm just thirsty. Liang Mengkai laughed and picked up a glass of wine that was filled by Zhao Feng just now and drank it up. Liang Hao not only had a glass of wine, but also cried, Ah. It's enough for your sister to take just one glass, for she is a girl, but you are a man, so I look down upon you. Zhang Li twisted her mouth and said. Give me 3 more glasses. Liang Hao said with a smile. Judging by the alcohol content of this wine, he knew that he could drink at least 10 bottles, therefore, these glasses of wine did not matter to him. After finishing drinking 3 more glasses of wine, Liang Hao asked, How's it going? Are they reconciled? Of course, the two of them have gone to do romantic things. Zhang Li laughed heartily. Poof, that's great. Liang Hao nodded, feeling relieved. No, Papa and Mama. Well, we're going to discuss whether Mama would come back to life. Meng corrected her. Oh, that's right. They intended to discuss it. Meng can play in the restaurant again tonight, Zif said with a smile. While they were chatting, the whole roast lamb was done, which had been cut into large pieces by the chef and sent to each table. There was no denying that they enjoyed this lunch most in recent days. Back at the romantic room of the hotel, nothing strange happened this time. Zhang Han was not surprised. If that magic energy appears frequently when I have sex with Xian, I'm likely to acquire incredible strength within a month. Of course, this was just his imagination. Since Zhang Han was well prepared mentally, he felt more comfortable. That was because the energy had affected his feeling more or less just now. This time, both of them were intoxicated in the entanglement and sublimation of their souls, as well as their bodies. After a long time, a soft voice and a deep voice were heard at the same time. The sound battle was over. Lying in Zhang Han's arms, Xian felt really happy. After whispering to Zhang Han for a while, Xian took the phone and glanced at it. Ouch, it's already 4 o'clock. Xian quickly blinked her big beautiful eyes and said, "We have to go back now or Meng Meng will wait for us in suspense." "Well, let's go back now, I'll cook you dinner." Zhang Han chuckled. "I should dress up simply." Xian's head moved closer to Zhang Han, and she gently kissed him, then got up and walked straight to the dresser. She started to comb her hair, naked. Zhang Han did not move, but lay on the bed lazily with his hands under his head, staring at Xian with a smile. Seeing his posture, Xian gave him a glad eye in the mirror. She put her hair up and coiled it at the back of her head, then said in doubt, "Husband, my eyes have recovered. They are neither red nor puffy. It should be attributed to the mysterious energy in your body when we had sex the first time. Therefore, you are in good health now. Thanks to you, my little Red Riding Hood, I've made a great breakthrough this time. It can be regarded as a miracle," Zhang Han said while chuckling. "Ha ha, have I brought good fortune to you?" Xian said with a chuckle. As was known to all, even the chilliest woman would be conquered by a stronger man. He, however, never heard of a chill goddess remaining indifferent when she was having sex with a man. Moreover, women would become the clingiest when they had sex for the first time, during which they would certainly share the most ambiguous relationships with men. At that point, Xian's sweet girlish feelings were completely inspired by Zhang Han. After hearing what she said, Zhang Han burst into laughter and said, "You did bring me great fortune. Ha ha, come on." Seeing that Xian had finished doing her hair, Zhang Han waved his hand to her. Suddenly, Xian felt an invisible force holding her up, then she slowly floated over to Zhang Han and pressed herself against Zhang Han's chest. "You are so overbearing that you never give others an opportunity to refuse." Xian put her head near Zhang Han and exhaled gently. Her graceful and soft posture, as well as her charming manners and tone, obviously lured him. Zhang Han could not help turning over. However, because time was limited, they did not have sex for a third time, but just showed affection to each other. "Well, okay, it's almost 4:30. Meng Meng will be anxious in a little while." Xian slightly blushed and said in a seductive tone, "Well, I'll let you go first." Zhang Han grinned, then got up and began to put on clothes. His clothes were easy to put on, so he got dressed really quickly. At that moment, Xian said, "Button up my clothes. The outermost row. Here I am." Zhang Han exclaimed while buttoning, "You are indeed in good shape. Generally, a woman's chest is smaller than yours if they are as thin as you." "Hmph. Of course," Xian said arrogantly. As Xian dressed herself up and put on shoes, she approached 1.8 meters in height, therefore, she was only about 5 centimeters shorter than Zhang Han. Xian seemed to have changed her style because she put her hair up. She looked like a gorgeous goddess with her hair down, while she looked like a noble lady with her hair up. Wearing sunglasses, Xian walked out with Zhang Han, holding his arm. They attracted a lot of people's attention along the way. After checking out, they got into the Mercedes, heading for New Moon Bay. Since Xian felt really sweet, she hummed a song on the way in the passenger seat. "I embraced love, when I woke up from my dreams, you waited persistently, and never left." As for Zhang Han, he listened to the melodious song while driving the car, grinning heartily. When he was driving, Zhao Feng called him and asked if he had needed to prepare some ingredients in advance. After thinking for a while, Zhang Han asked him for a variety of ingredients. About half an hour after hanging up the phone, he drove Xian back to the restaurant. At that point, more than 20 people were already lined up in front of the entrance. The restaurant was already full, and even Mr. Sheng, in a high position, was also sitting quietly aside. After a few days' torment, they eventually could have access to the dishes of the restaurant again. When the people in the queue saw Xian and Zhang Han coming back with their arms entwined, they could not help but say, "Welcome, boss. Welcome, boss's wife. Wow, you've finally come back, madam. We are so full of desire to eat the food here." What they said made Xian grin. Zhang Han wrapped his arm around Xian's waist with a smile. It was acknowledged that people were in high spirits when involved in happy events, and now Zhang Han was in that state. He was in a good mood, therefore. He cooked more dishes for dinner. The noodle soup was changed to beef noodle, and a lot of ordinary diners tasted a special dish. Ordinary diners were really excited to have the meal for members, so they all took pictures and shared them on WeChat Moments. Their photos evoked other normal diners' envy, and they growled that they had missed a great opportunity. Meng was the happiest one among the people present. Even when she was having dinner, she lay in Zhang Han's arms all the time, feeling extremely delighted. After dinner, Zhif, Zhang Li, Luo King, Zhang Han, and his family were on the second floor. They played with Meng for a moment. At 9 o'clock, when the restaurant became quiet, they walked downstairs and had some cold drinks, chatting with each other while drinking. "Oh, I'm a little sleepy, brother, sister-in-law. I will return to my apartment with Luo King now and have a good sleep." Zhang Li yawned and said, "If you are tired, you can go to the company to rest. Some suites upstairs were accessible a few days before." Zhao Feng, who was sitting aside, reminded her. "Fine." Zhang Li nodded. In fact, she had checked the suites there in the afternoon. She thought they were quite good since they were decorated like luxury suites in hotels. "Okay, master, can I go there with them?" Zhao Feng asked. "Wait." Xian suddenly interrupted, then asked Zhang Han while looking at him, "Aren't we going to Xihang today? Shouldn't we book the tickets tonight and go there tomorrow morning?" "Just book them tonight." Zhang Han nodded and said, "Xiaofeng, help us to book the flight tickets to Xihang at around 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." "Brother, sister-in-law, are you going to Xihang? What are you going to do?" Zhang Li asked with curiosity. "Yes, the news about my parents has reached me, so I have to figure out the details." Zhang Han glanced at Zhang Li and replied. "What?" Zhang Li's eyes widened, and she was overwhelmed by great excitement. Then she ran to Zhang Han hurriedly and asked, "Really? Did you truly get the news? Someone knows the details, but I may not be able to meet him. I won't know the concrete conditions until I get there," Zhang Han slowly answered. When Zhang Han had left the headquarters of the National Security Agency, Tannen had gotten the news, saying that Ui had left his sect half a month ago in order to visit his old friends in Xihang. Therefore, he probably could not meet with him this time, but Tannen still recommended Zhang Han to go over as Ui would contact his sect once in a while. Now, he was hopeful to get the news since he knew who he could ask and had a target, no longer at a loss. After hearing Zhang Han's words, Zhang Li looked at Zhao Feng and said, "I want to go with them." "So do I. I will feel bored if I stay in Hong Kong alone." Zif raised her hand. Zhao Feng thought for a moment, then said, "I need to make some arrangements and bring some people to protect you." At that time, a childish voice was heard from Zhang Han's arms. "How? What about me? I can't stay here alone if you all leave." "Ha ha." Xian grinned and said, "Of course we will take you. Are we going to go sightseeing?" Meng asked, blinking her eyes. "We can take you to go sightseeing after the business is over," Xian responded. Great, great, I can go out and play with Papa and Mama." Meng felt really delighted again. Now that she could stay in the restaurant today, she could listen to the story told by Papa, enjoy various delicious food, and go to other places to enjoy herself. How happy she was. "Brother, Aunt returned to Xihang a few days ago. She called to tell me that she had to be committed to dealing with some troublesome things in Xihang and would come to Hong Kong to visit us with Uncle after finishing her work." Zhang Li said, "Shall I contact her?" "Yes." Zhang Han nodded. He also thought of the aunt, his mother, Rong Jiali, who was born in the Rong clan in Linhai, had 3 brothers and a sister, and shared the most intimate relationship with that aunt. Compared with her, his mother did not get on well with her 3 brothers. He learned that his grandpa had not agreed with his parents' marriage at the beginning, but at the insistence of his mother, Grandpa had hosted the wedding for them. When he was about 5 years old, his grandpa died. The second time when he had returned to the wrong clan, he had felt that his mother was on bad terms with the whole clan, especially after the grandfather's death. Zhang Han did not know much about such complicated things, but only remembered that his aunt, Rong Jiaxin, was a very mysterious woman, who seemed to have learned martial arts and had been protecting his mother for several years. She had finally married to a man in Xihang, and Zhang Han had lost track of her for 6 years. Although she returned now, Zhang Han did not know how many details she knew about what had happened with his mother, therefore, it was necessary to visit her this time. After thinking for a while, Zhang Li ran to the second floor to make a phone call. As for Zhao Feng, he was wondering how many people he should take along with them. Eventually, he made up his mind to go though with a few of his men. He asked Ziyong to stay in Hong Kong, earning points by doing tasks with Instructor Liu, while he would take 7 men and 2 women, including Ahu, Elder Meng, and Leng Yi, a total of 10 people if counting himself in, to help the master. Zhang Han never worried about the manpower arrangement, and Zhao Feng made decisions according to the specific situations. After these days' training, he also acted like a mighty general. Of course, the reason why he became so confident was that his mainstay was here. After making the decision, Zhao Feng had to call to book the tickets. However, before he could make the phone call, the telephone rang. "Hello, Instructor Liu." Zhao Feng went to the small dining table aside. 1 minute after the line was connected, Zhao Feng's face greatly changed and the phone fell to the ground. Then he hurriedly picked it up and asked in a horrified tone, "Really? Okay, I got it. I will tell my master." He hung up the phone and took a few breaths as his eyes closed, then walked to the sofa. After seeing Zhao Feng's abnormal behavior, the people present all looked over. Zhao Feng's face was a little pale, as if he had been startled. He looked at Zhang Han and said in a trembling voice, "Master, what if we leave tonight? What happened?" Zhang Han asked. Zhao Feng glanced at Xian and the other 2 people vacillatingly. "Just get to the point, what happened? Do you want to hide something from me?" Xian said, compressing her mouth. "That's right, why are you so hesitant?" Zhao said in doubt, "Master." Zhao Feng hesitated again, but he finally bit the bullet and said, "There's something wrong. He Yunfei's adoptive father, He Qingshan, has come back, as a Wu Dao Grand Master. He, with incredible strength, occupies the 17th position on the list of the martial arts world in Hong Kong. He claimed that he would kill Master. If Master refuses to see him, he will kill all the family of Master." Director Tannen insisted on protecting Master, so the 2 of them promised to fight each other at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. "If He Qingshan wins, we'll be in jeopardy." "What do you mean?" Zif's face turned pale after hearing what he said. Although she was not aware of the martial arts world in the list, the man seemed to be a very troublesome enemy. Liu King was somewhat in confusion, and only knew that they got into trouble. Not to mention Meng, she was playing with her toys in Zhang Han's arms, feeling very delighted. Xian was also shocked. She looked at Zhang Han and said in a worried tone, "Do we need to leave tonight?" "No." Zhang Han held Xian's hand, then smiled and said, "Did you forget what I said to you?" "I haven't." Xian was lost in thought. "Since my husband is an immortal, he can defeat that man." After thinking for a moment, Xian asked again, "He, however, occupies the 17th position on the list. Is he really formidable? Didn't you tell me that you have just entered the martial arts world?" Master's wife, it is a regional list in the martial arts world, which ranks martial artists according to their overwhelming force. Except for those otherworldly masters, he ranks 17th among the mighty masters of the martial arts world in Hong Kong. Zhao Feng explained in detail. "Don't worry." Zhang Han glanced at Zhao Feng and chuckled, then said, "He Qingshan cannot freak me out. For me, he is still too young." After saying that, he held Xian's slender hand and said with a chuckle, I'll show you your husband's real strength tomorrow. Do you think you will win? Xian did not know much about martial arts, so she asked in this way. Absolutely, Zhang Han answered directly, then glanced at Zhao Feng, who was totally stunned, and said, let's go to Strange Peak Island tomorrow morning. Chapter 395, Too Noisy. Zhao Feng was totally stunned by that. As time went on, he also had an understanding of the martial arts world. He knew that obvious strength was the beginning for martial artists, and people who got inward strength and peak strength were already powerful masters. He had already mastered inward strength, which made him 10 times stronger than before. Chi strength masters had great inner strength and their moves were more powerful. Some people also had some mysterious abilities. For many martial artists, it was hard for them to break through and become a profound stage master, let alone Earth Stage Master or Heaven Stage Master. Heaven Stage Masters were at the same level as protectors at the National Security Agency and were quite influential in the martial arts world. Then, there came a question: what did being a Wu Dao Grand Master mean in the martial arts world? He heard from Instructor Liu that Wu Dao Grand Masters were respected by all, who could set up their own clans and were on top of the pyramid in the martial arts world. However, He Qingshan was not only just a Wu Dao Grand Master, his eldest disciple, Master Hong, was an early stage Grand Master and also a protector of the National Security Agency, who had fully mastered the firing palm. He Qingshan had reached the peak of the middle stage of Grand Master many years ago. It wasn't clear whether he had broken through to the late stage. If he had made a breakthrough, his power wouldn't just be doubled. As for the director of Hong Kong, Tannen, he was a powerful middle stage Grand Master. He was quite close to the late stage and had various means. The battle between them would definitely be furious, but their target was the same, Zhang Han. One party wanted to kill him, while the other one wanted to protect him. However, as a party to protect him, they could only win. Neither a draw nor a loss would be allowed. Therefore, Zhao Feng also felt great pressure. But after making things clear, he found that his master was so calm. As always, he made others feel that he was very confident. What's more, Xian's expression seemed to be telling him that she wasn't afraid either, as if she trusted Zhang Han very much and believed he would win. If it was put in Xian's words, it would be, "My husband is an immortal." Xian was a bit worried at first, but after she noticed Zhang Han's expression and words, her worries dissipated. Since he said that he'd take her there to show her his real power, he must have been 100% sure. Xian believed that it was unlikely that Zhang Han would put himself in danger. Zhao Feng stared at them for a long time, and finally went to arrange the flights. While he was doing that, Xian also received a phone call. "Liang Hao? I'm with my husband now. What's the matter?" "Oh, we know. My husband will go to teach that man a lesson tomorrow morning." After hearing that and hanging up the phone, Liang Hao was totally shocked. "Brother, how is it? Do they want to leave tonight?" Liang Mengkai hurriedly asked. "No, they won't, they." Liang Hao took a deep breath and said, "They'll go the tomorrow morning." "Huh?" Liang Mengkai's expression became stiff. Therefore, neither of them slept well at night. They got up at 5:30 the next day and drove the Escalade to the Mountain Gate area in the extreme northwest without even having breakfast. At Clearwater Bay Wharf in that area, they could rent a boat to go to Strange Peak Island. Strange Peak Island sloped gently, which was a place frequented by fishing enthusiasts and was also the largest gathering spot in Hong Kong for fishing. When Liang Mengkai and Liang Hao arrived at the location, there were already numerous luxury cars in the parking lot. There were a lot of Rolls-Royce Gusts, Rolls-Royce Phantoms, Bentleys, a variety of limited cars, and all kinds of super sports cars. It was even more fascinating than most auto shows. The Escalade they drove seemed to be the worst among them. People were coming and going in a continuous stream. About 100 troops with real ammunition were guarding there. It's magnificent. After getting out of the car, Liang Mengkai's face became twisted. After all, it's the battle between the super great masters on the list. Sister, the powerful people in the martial arts world have a lot of means. You'll see that later, but... Speaking of that, Liang Hao sighed, and then said, I hope that Xian and her husband will not come. That Grand Master, he is too powerful. The boss wouldn't do something that he isn't sure about. Liang Mengkai shook her head. I hope so. Liang Hao led her to the wharf. When he approached, he saw that 6 people with fishing gear not far away were asking, why can they go inside, but not us? What they got was a strict sentence, no comment, it's not open now, please go back. After a few words, those people shook their heads and didn't dare to say more, they just asked when it would open. After seeing that, Liang Hao and Liang Mengkai went closer. Then, 2 soldiers walked over and looked at them calmly without saying anything. We're here to watch the battle between Director and Grandmaster he. Liang Hao nodded and said, which family are you from? One of the soldiers asked. The Liang clan of Singapore. Go inside. The 2 soldiers directly moved aside, and then Liang Hao walked to the wharf with Liang Mengkai. There were more than 20 people in line and several people were stopped there. Board this ship. 200 for each. A staff member went over to command them. After paying the fee and boarding the ship, Liang Mengkai looked around at the people with curiosity. Most of them were well dressed and several people wore casual sportswear. Some of them looked extraordinary and some people were very excited. They were discussing in low voices. Oh my, even thinking about it makes me feel nervous now. It'll be the first time for me to see a battle between grandmasters. It's not the first time for me, but I'll see Tannen fight for the first time. He is my idol and will definitely win. Of course, Tannen is the 11th strongest on our list, while He Qingshan is the 17th. He's 6 places behind him. A chubby 17-year-old boy shook his head while saying, talk less and listen more. An old man next to the chubby boy frowned and scolded him. Then, he said, the battle between grandmasters is horrible. Grandmaster he cultivated privately some time ago. If he made a breakthrough, he wouldn't still be 17th on the list. It's just a list that shows people's power indirectly. Since anyone can make a breakthrough, it won't be static. If Director loses, He Qingshan would be 11th. Grandfather, why did they decide to have a fight? The chubby boy asked curiously. Once he said that, most of the people present were attracted and were all ears. They all knew that it was because of Master Zhang and Protector Zhang, but more than 80% of the people didn't know the specific reason. The old man was stunned. Then, he shook his head and sighed, saying, this battle between the powerful masters is all because of something done by one who is just a chi strength master. Protector Zhang, he killed He Yunfei, which caused this battle. Just a chi strength master? He's rather arrogant. Many people looked that way, watching that white-haired old man carefully. Suddenly, a middle-aged man dressed in luxurious clothes was shocked and his eyes widened. Then, he strode over, saluted with hands folded and bowed, while greeting him respectfully. It turns out to be Grandmaster Fang. Sorry that I didn't recognize you. Hello, sir, I'm Li Helen from the Li family. You're a talent. Good. With you, the Li family will keep flowering for another 10 years. The old man looked at the middle-aged man and then nodded slightly. Thank you for your compliment. The middle-aged man was very excited after hearing that. And that was just because the old man was a senior metaphysical grandmaster in Hong Kong, Fang Rushan, who could predict things. After hearing the middle-aged man's words, all the people around him were shocked and they began to discuss in low voices. What? He's Grandmaster Fang? My God, he's Grandmaster Fang, ranked 16th on the list. He's a legendary figure. He has the ability of finding the most auspicious location for buildings. He can tell what happened to a person 5 years ago and divine what he will experience in 10 years. That's profound and mysterious. I really feel so lucky to have met him today. Liang Hao and Liang Mengkai had looked at him for a long time and still didn't know who the old man was. After hearing the gasps and discussion from the people around them, they realized that the old man had such a background. I'm sitting on the same boat as a metaphysical Grand Master. Liang Hao's mouth trembled slightly. The Grand Masters and Chi Strength Masters that he rarely met at ordinary times, as well as some martial artists, all appeared in front of him like cabbages in the market on that day. There were indeed great masters, but it wasn't easy to see them. Put it in another way, his status had not yet reached that level. On the way there, Liang Hao was somewhat worried. But at the moment, he didn't feel that diffident. He had just boarded a boat randomly and found that there were a lot of great masters there who could kill him as easy as blowing off dust. Ahem, I'd better stay low-key. Liang Hao and Liang Mengkai looked around, noticing many ships were coming and going. It seemed that there were already many people on Strange Peak Island. Strange Peak Island was not very large, the terrain was relatively flat and there were not many plants. To the east, there were hills extending nearly 1 kilometer, with an elevation of over 30 meters. The right part was flat. On the far right was the fishing place that people frequented. There was also a 5-story building, which was the fishing club. In the middle of the flat ground, there was a rugged rocky area. Just then, in the center of the rock stood a person, who was looking at the distant scenery with his hands clasped behind his back. On the left side of the rocky ground, that was below the hillside, there were many people standing there in the formation of a crescent moon. Everyone was imposing, and it could be seen that they were all great martial artists. With one glance, one could tell that there were 300 or 400 people. There were more people on the back of the hillside. It was very crowded and there were nearly 1,000 people there. After Liang Hao and Liang Mengkai arrived at the island and saw such a scene, they became rather reserved. It looks like a grand event. Liang Hao smiled bitterly and dialed Chu Hui's number. After learning his location, he walked to the right with Liang Mengkai and saw Chu Hui in a corner at the back. It's 6:30. You're a little late, Chu Hui whispered. When did you arrive? Liang Mengkai asked curiously. My parents and I arrived here at 5 o'clock. They're in the front. Chu Hui pointed with his mouth to the crowd below the hillside. What is the situation now? Liang Hao asked. The situation, the man standing there is He Kingshan. Chu Hui curled his lips and said, he came first, so this battle is inevitable. Master Hong over there said very arrogantly earlier that his master will definitely win today. Liang Hao looked over and saw that several people headed by Master Hong were the closest to the field. Xiao Hui, I just saw someone called Grand Master Fang. Before Liang Hao had finished his words, He Kingshan, who was in the center of the field, turned around and looked at an old man, while saying loudly, Brother Fang, you're also here, Grand Master He. Fang Rushan nodded, some worries were filling his eyes while he was saying, on the way here, I divined that there would be blood today, so, the battle between you and Director can be reconsidered. Fang Rushan spoke politely, but He Kingshan laughed and shook his head directly, saying, the man who will fall today must be Iltanan. He has repeatedly stopped me from doing anything. Does he really think that I'm a coward? It seems that the director of Hong Kong needs to be changed. After saying that, he glanced at his eldest disciple. He thought that after the battle, Master Hong might have a new name, Director Hong. After Fang Rushan heard the words, he shook his head slightly and became silent. For the battle later, he only divined that someone would definitely die, but he didn't know who the specific person would be. After all, in a battle was between two Grand Masters, it could be said that the more powerful a man was, the more difficult it would be to predict things about him. There were even people whose life was unpredictable. The people who heard their conversation at the back began to discuss immediately. Liang Hao also looked at Chu Hui while asking, how many Grand Masters are there now? There are 7 now, including He Kingshan who ranks 17th on the list, Grand Master Fang who ranks 16th, Master Hong who isn't yet on the list, Grand Master Ming in black who ranks 29th, Grandmaster Bai who ranks last, 50th on the list, as well as the woman in the east. Do you see her? She seems to be in her 30s. She's Grandmaster Lan from the Lingshan sword sect from the mainland. It seems that she has a rather high status and everyone was very polite to her at the beginning, Chu Hu explained. There are so many. What about Chi's strength masters? Liang Hao's face trembled slightly. Chi's strength masters? There are at least 100 present here. Chu Hu curled his lips and replied. Liang Hao's mouth trembled a little and he sighed, saying, the Chi's strength masters, who are rarely to be seen at ordinary times, are worthless here. Ha ha, Chu Hu laughed and said, I was also quite surprised when I found out about this. They're all gathered here today, but when they leave here later, you won't meet one so easily on the street. While they were talking, suddenly, the crowd began to discuss heatedly. Liang Hao and the others looked in the direction where people were talking about, and then, they were stunned. They saw that a long-haired man in a green gown was walking over step by step from the sea in the east. With each step, he would advance more than 10 meters. Under everybody's attention, the man was walking toward them from the sea. He looked rather strong, with slightly black skin, a square face, and big eyes. Is that Directel? Liang Hao looked at the sea with his eyes narrowed. Seeing that the man was approaching step by step, he asked in amazement. Looks like it isn't. Chu Hui shook his head slightly, saying, I heard from my family that Directel is nearly 190 centimeters tall. Then who is that? Is he another great master? Brother Fang. The man arrived quickly. After looking around, he finally fixed his eyes on Fang Rushan and greeted him by cupping one hand in the other before his chest. Grandmaster he. Fang Rushan smiled slightly and nodded. It could be seen that they were on good terms. Then, He Qingshan looked at the man and thought for a moment before asking, Are you He Chen? Yes. He Chen nodded and said, I heard about the battle between Grandmaster He and Directel, so I came over to watch. He Qingshan nodded and then looked away. They just needed to greet a bit, since anyone could be there to watch the open battle between him and Directel. He Chen nodded after hearing the words and then stood quietly on the far right. However, on the hillside, when Liang Hao heard the name of He Chen, he was stunned first, and then his expression changed greatly. He almost lost his voice. It's him. Do you know him? Chu Hu asked with curiosity. I've heard about him. He's a famous grandmaster from Singapore. I only heard of him from the elders. Liang Hao shook his head with a smile. Hey, it's really an eye-opener today, Chu Hu said with some emotions. They're people with really great influence. Many rich people can only stand on the hillside. Since he was managing the family business, he didn't know how many years he'd need to work before he could be qualified to sit down there. There were many chairs in several places below the hillside, while those who were sitting up there were all influential men in the business world. Chu Hui was envious, but Liang Hao was hesitating. Finally, he couldn't help saying, Sister, let's go say hello to Grandmaster He. The boss will be here in a while, should we? Liang Mengkai asked slowly. That's what I thought. Liang Hao nodded before taking Liang Mengkai there. Chu Hui was surprised at first, and then also followed them. After 5 minutes, they arrived behind He Chen. Grandmaster He, Liang Hao greeted in a low voice. He Chen turned and looked at him. He frowned slightly because he didn't like to be disturbed. I'm Liang Hao from the Liang clan, the eldest grandson of Liang. Crossing Liang Hao moved his head backward and said in a low voice, I heard that my grandfather and you are old friends, so I came over to say hello. He Chen stopped frowning and nodded slightly. Your grandfather mentioned you to me earlier. Your ability isn't bad. You should be able to break through to Chi's strength in 2 years or so. Puff. Liang Hao exhaled and felt great pressure from talking with the Grandmaster. After thinking for a moment, he said, Thank you for your praise, Grandmaster He. Well. In the end, Liang Hao wasn't able to say anything. Just be straightforward, Don't be like a girl, He Chen said while waving his hand. Here is the case, Grand Master Liang Hao forced himself to say, the whole matter is caused by Master Zhang, right? He's my good friend and will be here later. I advised him not to come, but if he's really here, can you give him a hand? He Chen was stunned by his words. After keeping silent for 3 seconds, he shook his head while saying, listen, boy, your friend's coming here is the same as courting death. Even if he's here, I won't help him, and I think I'm no match for Grand Master so I can't help you with this. Well, all right. Liang Hao smiled bitterly, finding that he'd taken it for granted. Just when he was about to turn and leave, He Chen said, just watch the battle here, take a closer look, it'll be good for your future. Yes, thank you, Grand Master Liang Hao and the others stopped. They stood behind him quietly. In no more than a minute, there was suddenly a sensation in the field. He's here. He Chen was surprised and looked to the west. He saw a figure flying from the west, and in just 20 seconds, he arrived at the rocky ground, standing at the opposite side of He Qingshan 33 meters away. He should be Directal, Chu Hui reminded him in a low voice. Liang Hao looked at him carefully. He saw that Directal was nearly 190 centimeters tall and very strong, wearing an extra-large tang suit. He and He Qingshan were looking at each other. It seemed that the confrontation between them had changed into a fierce energy and spread into the air. All the people involuntarily closed their mouths and held their breath. Lieutenant, He Qingshan suddenly opened his mouth and said in a cold voice, are you sure you want to fight with me? I can give you one last chance, go back. It seems that you haven't made the breakthrough. With his left hand on his waist, Lieutenant sneered and said, you haven't reached the late stage. Who gave you the courage to talk to me like that? Swish. After saying that, Lieutenant suddenly moved his right hand to his waist, where a dazzling soft sword was drawn out. Just then, Grand Master Lan from the Lingshan sword sect narrowed her eyes. This soft sword is a heaven stage treasure, soul-killing sword, which is very famous. It seems that you are determined to die. He Qingshan's face darkened. Then I'll show you what I've learned when I was practicing privately in the extreme yin place. It's an extinct kung fu, 9 shadow skill. After that, He Qingshan's palms moved. Swish, swish, swish. Suddenly, his figure was divided into 2, and then divided into 3, and eventually divided into 9, forming a crescent moon around Lieutenant. After seeing that, many people who went there to increase their knowledge rounded their eyes. Replication? This is too excessive. However, many people in the martial arts world had been quite used to it because there were many skills more mysterious than that and it wasn't rare at all. But all the Wu Dao grandmasters present frowned. With the common replication skill, they could use their keen sense of smell to tell what was real or what was fake, but they felt that the 9 figures in front of them all had great energy, as if they were all a real body. That was quite extraordinary. Lieutenant was shocked. He hadn't expected He Qingshan to have learned such a skill. It could be said that everyone present had held their breath. Just when the great battle between the 2 grandmasters was about to start, suddenly, 2 figures came from the club on the other side. They dressed casually. It could be faintly seen that one was a tall and handsome guy, and the other was a gorgeous lady, whose 2 long legs were eye-catching. It seemed that they were traveling there and strolling to the site. What's wrong with them? Don't they know that there's a big battle here? Many people were confused. Gradually, the discussion became louder and louder. Many of the grandmasters present also looked over. Lieutenant was surprised and his face darkened. I told you not to come. Why are you still here? It seems that He Qingshan can defeat me now. If Master Hong also takes action, then they. Thinking of that, Lieutenant felt depressed. People who saw things clearly were also shocked. Oh no, the boss is really here. Grand Master can you do us a favor? I'm begging you, Liang Mengkai pleaded. Grand Master please help us this time. I'll keep it in mind and repay you later. I can't, I'm no match for He Qingshan. Since they're here, I guess that they're determined to die. No one can help them, He Chen said slowly. He didn't feel a little bit of energy from that Master Zhang. Just then, He Qingshan retrieved his other figures. He looked that way and stopped fighting. Under everyone's attention, the two of them strolled over there hand in hand while chatting. What do they intend? Everybody felt that was it so hard to figure it out. Master Hong was also mad about that. He strode forward and shouted in anger, Master, that's Master Zhang, an eye for an eye, I'll kill them, I'll use their heads and blood to pay homage to Yunfei's spirit in heaven. As soon as he said that, everyone present was shocked, especially Ltanan, whose face had darkened. Complicated feelings were expressed from his eyes and he sighed heavily. But the next moment, a calm voice was heard. It's too noisy. Suddenly, that man raised his right palm slightly. The next moment, poof, for Master Hong who strode over there, a famous Wu Dao Grandmaster, a bloody mist burst out from his whole body. He became powerless and fell to the ground. He was breathless. At that moment, almost all people rounded their eyes. No one believed their own eyes. Everyone gasped in amazement. Chapter 396, Too Young. What? Master Hong is dead? How is that possible? How did he do that? Hiss, did he kill him with his eyes? We didn't even see how he killed him, it's so horrible. Many people who had seen it could not believe their eyes. He moved his palm gently from 20 meters away, and then a Wu Dao Grandmaster died immediately. What's that skill? Those who were not martial artists or low-ranking martial artists couldn't figure it out. After those Chi strength masters saw that scene, they almost bit their tongues. What monster is this? They faintly felt that at that moment, an extremely powerful energy was suddenly formed around Master Hong's body. It crushed him in an instant, leaving him no time to resist. That mysterious ability scared them, making them feel freezing cold. They thought that if that man were to fight with them, all of them would have died already. Several Wu Dao Grandmasters present. They were also extremely shocked. The metaphysical Grandmaster Fang Rushan's eyes widened. It's like this battle isn't between He Qingshan and Ltanan, but him. On the far left, after Grandmaster Lan from the Lingshan sword sect saw Zhang Han raise his hand, her eyes rolled slightly. She felt that a strong spiritual force spurted out from that man's hand, which was like a volcanic eruption, or a powerful palm. It held Master Hong in an instant and killed him like killing an ant. This man has at least the power of a peak middle stage Grandmaster, maybe he's even at the late stage. Since when is there such a young Grandmaster in Hong Kong? Both Liang Hao and Liang Menkai, who were on the right, were stunned. My God, my God, my God. Liang Hao even couldn't close his mouth. He said in surprise, the boss is awesome. He killed a Wu Dao Grandmaster in an instant. Am I mistaken? My God, a Chi Strength Master couldn't do that. An ordinary Grandmaster cannot do that either. Such as me. He Chen took a deep breath and said in shock, I think he has the power of a late-stage Grandmaster. He can kill people only by moving his hands. That's horrible. Liang Hao was shocked and Liang Menkai was also unable to speak. At the back of the hillside, Zhao Feng, Ahu, Zhang Li, and several other people were also stunned by that. Master is so strong, he's awesome, really? Zhao Feng yelled, while deep inside he shouted, this is a cultivator. This is my master. The boss is awesome. Ahu, Elder Meng, and the others admire Zhang Han a lot. My brother, he. With eyes open wide, Zhang Li stared at Zhang Han in excitement. As for the two people standing in the center of the rocky ground, Ltanan was shocked at first, but then his eyes were filled with surprise. He turned out to be a Wu Dao Grandmaster. I felt that he was just a profound stage master last time. How did he? He looks like an ordinary person, but actually, he's a Wu Dao Grandmaster. That's unbelievable. Ltanan looked at Zhang Han with amazement. He Shan, who was not far from him, had a stiff face, his eyes trembled slightly and he couldn't believe his own eyes. Isn't he just a useless profound stage master? Which profound stage master can kill a grand master? Who the hell is he? He Shan frowned and stared at Zhang Han. A sense of crisis arose in his heart because he thought that if that was a conspiracy and Lieutenant teamed up with that man to fight him, then it was extremely frightening. Though he was a proud and ambitious man, he thought that if those two men fought him together, he'd probably escape first. While he was thinking, the man opposite him opened his mouth and said calmly, "You are He Shan, right? Don't just stand there. Don't waste my time, I still need to catch a plane. What tricks do you have? Come on, show my wife." All the people present were shocked by his words. Why do I feel that he takes He Shan as a toy? He asked him to show his tricks to his wife. He looks down on him so much. They didn't know that Zhang Han wanted to solve the problem first and then return to the boat with Xian because Meng was still waiting for them. They had to go out that day, so Xian simply packed up the things the previous night. Back then, Zhang Han was lying on the bed, playing with Meng while watching Xian working. He increasingly understood the elder's words, there must be a woman in the family. It meant that a wife was indispensable in a man's life. She was scrupulous, she hummed while packing up the things. They didn't have much luggage, so only a suitcase was used for the three of them. They got up at 6 o'clock in the morning and Zhang Han prepared breakfast. After having the meal, the group of people went to the dock and Instructor Liu brought 20 men with ammunition. After they arrived at Strange Peak Island by boat, Zif stayed on the boat to look after Meng. Zhang Han and Xian went to the island from the side, while Zhao Feng took the others up the hill to watch the battle. There are so many people. After seeing a lot of people standing on the hillside and below, Xian said in a low voice. She was a little nervous and held Zhang Han's hand more tightly. They just came here to watch. They're witnesses. Zhang Han smiled slightly and said, whenever there is a battle between great masters, thousands of people will go there to watch. By watching how powerful men fight, they can sometimes learn something and improve their own cultivation. You'll also cultivate in the future. So, I took you here to watch a small battle today. Is this a small battle? It looks magnificent. Xian licked her lips and said, you'll get it later. After saying that, Zhang Han paused, and then said, but it's extremely dangerous to cultivate. The cultivation world is so cruel that only the strongest can survive, and there are no other rules. Although I'll always protect you and Meng, you may still get hurt sometimes. Zhang Han thought that it was time to warn her, but Xian just kept silent for a second. She didn't seem worried or scared. Then, she faintly said, I heard that when you saved me last time, 13 people were. Yes, they're dead. Zhang Han nodded directly. Xian licked her lips, finding that it was difficult to describe her feelings. After learning the information about Zhang Han's cultivation and rebirth, she felt like the whole world had been expanded a lot. Her worldview collapsed and was then reorganized. She faintly felt that her life should just be like that. I feel a little bit awkward now, but I'll get used to it later. Xian slightly nodded. Zhang Han gently pinched Xian's palm and said, there's a long way to go. I'd like to lead a quiet and peaceful life with you around and watching Meng grow up. However, I don't think such a man as Master Hong deserves to live in this world. So, Zhang Han gently waved his hand. Then, Master Hong was directly killed on the spot. That was what happened earlier. When Zhang Han finished his words, all the Wu Dao Grand Masters reacted angrily. He's too arrogant. He Chen shook his head again and again, saying, this will only irritate He Shan. Although he can kill Master Hong in an instant, Master Hong was only a young man who had just been promoted to a Grand Master. I have that ability, too. Although he's a Grand Master, he's still too young and his opponent is He Shan, who has been a middle-stage Grand Master for many years and is pretty close to the late stage. He's indeed too arrogant. A Grand Master standing not far from He Chen nodded and said, "It looks like he's not 30 yet. Even though he's talented and a middle-stage Grand Master, he cannot take a senior Grand Master as a toy. Does he think that he is invincible? It seems that even Emperor King wasn't as arrogant as him back then. He even brought his woman with him. What can I say? He underestimates He Qingshan." After calming down a bit, they realized that there were several people on the scene who also had the ability to kill Master Hong. They had some doubts about Zhang Han's ability because he was too young after all. After He Qingshan heard his words, he breathed tightly and stared at him angrily, while saying, "What did you say?" It seemed that he was about to fight, but he was very vigilant. He needed to defend against Lieutenant, while watching Zhang Han, feeling that he was between a hammer and an anvil. Fortunately, Lieutenant took back his soft sword and moved backward, not planning to fight. "Show us your strongest move. Don't say that I didn't give you a chance," Zhang Han said calmly. While he was speaking, some light flashed over his pupils and the energy of his whole body changed, which created a mysterious atmosphere. At the same time, the cards in his jacket pocket flew out one by one. They kept flying around his and Ziyan's bodies, like some swimming elves. "You're too arrogant," He Qingshan roared. With his arms crossed in front of his chest, he struck down on the ground. Some powerful energy spread around He Qingshan immediately, and then he lifted his arms up. Swish! Innumerable stones in a 10-meter radius were all lifted up more than 3 meters. The stones, which were as large as palms or thumbs, had all become He Qingshan's weapons at that moment. "Then I'll let you taste my firing palm," He Qingshan sneered while jerking his hands forward. In an instant, countless stones rushed forward and gradually gathered into the form of a huge palm 5 meters high along the way. Since the stones couldn't withstand the great power, they exploded and numerous small stones were created. In a breath, the stones became as small as pupils and it seemed that people could feel the heat wave from that palm at a distance. Many Chi Strength Masters were shocked by that. That's He Qingshan, who ranks 17th on the list. His firing palm has reached the peak of perfection. He's over 10 times stronger than Master Hong. The firing palm contains infinite power. I can even feel it here. If I were there, I'm afraid I'd be dead in an instant. That's so powerful. I wonder how Master Zhang, oh no, Grandmaster Zhang will deal with that. Why does Grandmaster Zhang still not move? Everyone was shocked when they saw Zhang Han at that moment because he was still speaking softly into the beautiful woman's ear while the firing palm was approaching. "You're fighting He Qingshan, how can you ignore him?" Some people got nervous, not to mention what would happen next. Just that attitude had shown his contempt for his opponent. It could be imaged that He Qingshan must have been very angry after seeing that he'd been ignored. In fact, He Qingshan was pissed off. It was his first time to see a man treating him with such an attitude. He's so bold. He Chen frowned slightly and sighed, saying, "Even I would be very careful when facing his firing palm." What is this? Suddenly, his pupils shrank and he didn't get the chance to finish his words. He saw the fierce fire was going forward quickly. When it moved more than half of the distance, Zhang Han pressed his right hand forward. Suddenly, 18 cards flew forward and formed a weird pattern in the air. Heavenly Wheel Seal. Then, the fierce fire was suddenly shocked, and then it became smaller and smaller. It was absorbed in the 18 cards. The weird pattern seemed to be tying up all the 18 cards. Just when people were wondering how he dealt with that move. Puff, puff, puff. A small palm print burst out from the card in the center. The palm was growing larger and larger. That was clearly the firing palm that He Qingshan just performed. He actually absorbed the attack and then released it to counterattack. What is this trick? Lieutenant, who was not far at the back, was quite surprised by that. I didn't expect him to be so strong. He Qingshan obviously didn't expect that. He was mad. He gritted his teeth and performed the firing palm once again, which collided with the firing palm that had returned. Boom! In an instant, a gale began to blow in a 20-meter radius, as if there was a blast. But, whoosh! What made He Qingshan quite surprised was that the returning firing palm still contained great energy and it quickly rushed over. How could this be? He Qingshan hurriedly began to control his spiritual force and gathered it in front of him to resist the last wave. Under everybody's attention, the remaining firing palm, along with the stones, constantly slammed into He Qingshan. Although they didn't cause any damage, He Qingshan felt like he was being pressed. That was really an eye-opener for the people around. He Chen couldn't speak anymore. With his mouth slightly stiff, he looked at Zhang Han in shock, feeling that he had underestimated him. In about 3 breaths, the mess on the field disappeared. He Qingshan's face darkened. Such a lame trick shouldn't have appeared in front of me. Zhang Han looked extremely calm, as if he was just stating a fact. He looked at He Qingshan while saying lightly, "Show me your strongest move directly." Many people's expressions were changed after they heard his words. They doubted him earlier, but at that moment, they felt that he was fully qualified to say that. After hearing his words, He Qingshan became furious and said coldly, "Boy, you've irritated me. It seems that no one has made me so angry in many years. Trust me, I'll definitely kill you today. If you want to see my strongest move, then break my biggest secret 9 shadows movement first." After that, He Qingshan shook his body and his figure was divided into 2. But when it was divided into 3, attack. Suddenly, Zhang Han's eyes were shining with a diamond-like dazzling light. He Qingshan's third figure failed to be formed. And the second figure, poof! Just like a fart, it dissipated directly. What? He Qingshan rounded his eyes and couldn't believe what was happening. He looked at Zhang Han and almost lost his voice. How did you do that? How dare you call such a weak move your biggest secret? Zhang Han shook his head slightly and said plainly, "It's lame. I'll give you one last chance to show me your strongest move." After Zhang Han said that, all the people present were stunned. He Qingshan seemed to have been thoroughly humiliated in just a while and he refused to recognize that the secret move that he tried so hard to learn had been regarded as garbage. No, it can't be garbage. There must be something wrong. It must be. Yes, it should be like this. He Qingshan's eyes were getting brighter and brighter. Just at that moment, he was suddenly enlightened. Ha ha ha. He Qingshan laughed madly and looked at Zhang Han, while saying loudly, "What you just said is right, it was really lame, but thanks to you, I finally understand that the 9 shadows movement should be like this." After saying that, he lifted his right hand in front of his chest, with the middle finger and index stuck straight out. Some light flashed over his eyes. Swish! 9 figures were formed in an instant. They were all looking at Zhang Han, with exactly the same expression. He Qingshan laughed while saying, "Then I will let you taste the biggest secret move in my life, 9 shadows movement, wind control. This is a little interesting." Zhang Han still looked at He Qingshan calmly, saying, "But I don't want to see your performance next." As soon as he finished that, some light flashed over his eyes and his palms rushed forward. The 18 cards were immediately sent out and moving at different angles, as if they would topple the mountains and overturn the seas. At the same time, the spiritual force in Zhang Han's body continued to gather in the 18 cards, and each card absorbed enough energy. Suddenly, according to Zhang Han's spiritual sense, the cards were connected together, as if by an invisible spider web. A mysterious atmosphere was formed on those cards, making it hard for people to understand. All the Wu Dao Grand Master's pupils shrank after they saw that. Weapon formation? Fang Rushan's body suddenly trembled. He couldn't believe what was happening in front of his eyes. He felt that the 18 cards had been formed into a powerful formation. A weapon formation involved a lot of mysterious techniques. The cultivator should be skilled at formations, and also psychokinesis. Fang Rushan said in shock, "I didn't expect that I'd see a weapon formation today. He's horrible." Other Grand Masters were also shocked. The facial expression of Grandmaster Lan from the Lingshan clan changed slightly. Even I don't know much about that move and only the elders in my clan are familiar with it. Is he already that strong? He Chen looked at Zhang Han in amazement and muttered, how old is he? Is it that there will be a second person like Emperor King in Hua Nation? Everyone else also felt the mysterious energy at that moment. However, the target, He Qingshan, didn't feel the mystery at all, thinking that they were just some ordinary objects with spiritual force. Ha ha ha, my 9 shadows movement can be converted in an instant. You don't know how powerful it is after all. I will break your move first, and then take your life. He Qingshan laughed loudly, while his 9 figures moved, as if they were 9 different people each with different moves, to resist the incoming cards. Bang, 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 bang. Some intense sounds were heard and some discerning people could find that there were a total of 18 sounds. Your attack is like child's play for me. Seeing that the 18 cards were flying back to Zhang Han, He Qingshan shook his head slightly and sighed. I thought you were a tricky character. Who knew that you're just a paper tiger? After all, you're still too young. You don't understand how powerful my hard-won skill is. Oh, really? Zhang Han suddenly smiled lightly. When He Qingshan saw Zhang Han's indifferent and significant looks in his eyes, his heart skipped a beat and he suddenly had a sense of crisis. However, the next moment, he felt his heart was attacked and then all his shadows dissipated, only leaving his real body. With eyes open wide, he lowered his head slowly. He saw that a black card was slowly coming out from his heart. Looking up, he saw that one of the 18 cards slowly dissipated. When did the card come? Haven't I just driven the 18 cards back? Why is that? It's impossible. He Qingshan couldn't figure it out, but he felt that he was losing his energy quickly. How is that possible? He Qingshan stared at Zhang Han and said in a tone of disbelief. In his gaze, the 18 cards slowly flew back to Zhang Han's pocket. Finally, he looked at He Qingshan and said lightly, it's you who are too young. Chapter 397, Leaving for Xihang. Because I'm too young? He Qingshan looked at Zhang Han, his face as pale as ashes. Feeling that he was dying bit by bit, he fell into ultimate despair. It took me decades of cultivation to reach my present level. Now I don't even have a chance to escape. I'm extremely alert indeed. Why can't I avoid his attack? How did that card, in the end, reach behind me silently, accurately find and aim at my body? Is the 9 shadows movement really not worthy of his attention? This was the last thought of He Qingshan, and then his body fell to the ground. Until he died, he was confused. In the face of this scene, everyone was stunned and there was dead silence over the field. They didn't expect to see the death of He Qingshan, who was ranked 17th on the list of martial arts in Hong Kong. Who could have predicted this? Who would believe it if they didn't see it with their own eyes? He Qingshan is dead? Said a trembling Heaven Stage Master. He Qingshan is dead, said Fang Rushan. Fang Rushan looked grave. At last, he realized that when he arrived, his inexplicable uneasiness had predicted the death of 2 masters, He Qingshan and Elder Hong. If I were to resist him, I'm afraid I would die faster, said He Chen. Feeling cold to the bone, He Chen hardly dared to look directly at the challenge arena. As a Grand Master, he could see clearly from all aspects of chi, energy, and so on that those 18 cards were fought back one by one. Then, what was the card that went straight through He Qingshan's body? What was the missing card? Was this a high-level form of a weapon formation? Everyone looked at the 2 figures leaving hand in hand reverently and fearfully. They all knew that the death of one legend indicated the birth of a new legend. There was still silence over the field until the 2 figures left the crowd's field of vision. Ltanin realized what had happened. What the hell? Said Ltanin. His eyes widened gradually and he looked blank. It's too scary. Ltanin murmured a few words. Then he went along in the direction that Zhang Han had left. At this time, Grand Master Lan of the Lingshan sword sect in the back took a few steps forward and made an obeisance. Director, who is the gentleman just now? Asked Master Lan. Tanan stopped, turned around, and looked at all the people present. Then he slowly said a few words that seemed to have been thought over and over again. You can call him Zhang Han Yang. Zhang Han Yang. Grand Master Lan repeated the name, her eyes shining with a strange light. He killed Elder Hong. He made a weapon formation and killed He Qingshan. Fang Rushan spoke slowly and seriously, his eyes blazing like torches. From today on, Zhang Han Yang will take 17th place on the list of martial arts in Hong Kong. The whole martial arts world will respect him as a great master. All the people present burst into an uproar after he finished speaking. Grandmaster Zhang, or Zhang Han Yang from New Moon Bay, he is so horrible. When a grandmaster gets angry, there will be a river of blood. It seems that in the Battle of Mount Yunding, he was hiding his strength and giving the other side a chance. Yes, Master Zhang gave Biquan Long and He Yunfei a chance at Mount Yunding, but they provoked him again and again. Do they really think the martial arts master is good-tempered? It is they too who caused Biquan Feng, Gafang, Biquan Long, He Yunfei, and others to die in the Dragon Triumph Club, and now they have involved the two masters, Elder Hong and He Qingshan. They lost a great deal through trying to save a little. Many martial artists shook their heads and sighed. Although it was officially forbidden to publicize, it was only aimed at ordinary people in society, and the breaking news had already been spread in the martial arts world. At this time, in the corner of the last row, several men of different ages stood together. Father, he is a grandmaster strong, a supermaster. I gave him a car. Is that right? Yi Han said in excitement. Yi Han's father turned his head in a daze, and his mouth quivered. You sent too little. Contact Zhang. Oh no, contact Zhao Feng, and then we will continue sending gifts to Master Zhang. Since Mr. Zhang is a little interested in luxury cars, let's empty our garage. Yes. Yi Han nodded in excitement. Zhao Feng didn't want to have a deeper relationship with him. But he also paid for 10 luxury cars, including the extended Rolls-Royce, Bentley, the extended Mercedes-Benz G500, Ferrari LaFerrari, etc., so that more luxury cars were added to the company's garage. Then the people on Strange Peak Island retreated one after another. Liang Hao? He Chen suddenly turned his head and said with a smile, are you familiar with Grandmaster Zhang? Well, Master, I have a general relationship with Master Zhang since we haven't known each other for a few days, but his wife and I are friends since childhood, Liang Hao replied in a low voice. Huh? He Chen waved his hand, smiled and said, just call me Uncle He. You and his wife are friends? That's great. You can arrange for me to visit them and make friends with them in a few days. Liang Hao grinned and said, Uncle He, they are going out for a few days. No problem, I can wait. I will stay in Hong Kong for about 10 days. My task this time is to guard the business group of Singapore, and their negotiation will last for several days. He Chen shook his head. Okay, I'll call them later. Liang Hao nodded. On the other side, after the battle, the 18 cards flew back to Zhang Han's pocket. He held Ziyan's hand and smiled at her. Let's go, said Zhang Han in a gentle voice. Then he took Ziyan's hand and walked to the shore step by step. Although the road was full of rubble, Ziyan felt as if she were floating forward. Every time, Zhang Han would skillfully avoid the rubble and have her step on the flat road. She pursed her lips, blinked her beautiful big eyes, and secretly looked at Zhang Han. Why do you always look at me secretly? Is there something strange on my face? Zhang Han couldn't help laughing. No, honey, you are a powerful immortal, said Ziyan. Then she bit her lower lip and added, they are all dead, doesn't it matter? Of course, the director of the National Safety Administration was standing in the back, and he said nothing about it. Actually, it doesn't matter if we fight in the martial arts circle. just like how we did in the world of immortality, except that there are more restrictions on violence here. Take He Qingshan for example. If an ordinary person humiliated him in person, even if he killed them, he would not be punished, but if he killed people for no reason, the National Security Agency would intervene in this matter. Maybe it is the so-called a great master cannot be humiliated. Zhang Han explained it simply. I see. Xian nodded, and her red lips slightly raised as she spoke. My dear, you are so excellent, you are just as bright as the sun. Everyone looks at you with admiration and awe, but I. Xian felt the pressure. You are the best, you can make me love you so much and give birth to an angel. For me, you and Meng Meng are the most important. Zhang Han said softly. Stop flattering me. Xian's eyes sparkled with happiness. When I find my parents, I'll go to your family to propose marriage. I'll hold the biggest wedding for you. Zhang Han raised his hand and kissed Xian on the back of her hand. Hee, I'll wait for you. When they got to the boat, Meng Meng, who was in Zif's arms, couldn't wait to stretch out her arms. Papa, Mama, Papa, Mama. Zhang Han put his right hand around Xian's slender waist and jumped out 5 meters, just landing on the boat. The little girl went straight into Zhang Han's arms. I missed you. Meng Meng complained. Missed you. Instructor Liu's mouth quivered. Please, it took them less than 3 minutes to go and come back. Boss, is it over? Instructor Liu asked curiously. Yes. As soon as Zhang Han nodded, Zhao Feng and the others came back with cheering voices. Master, you are so powerful. Boss, you're awesome. Xian was amused by them and burst out laughing. These faithful friends were like loyal fans of Zhang Han, and sometimes they would be so funny. They were all attracted by Zhang Han's personality charm. Instructor Liu was stunned. 3 minutes to solve the battle, plus the round-trip time. Did Zhang Han immediately come back after saying hello to them? He imagined that the boss and his wife went over and said, hello, goodbye, and then came back. It should take 3 minutes. In Instructor Liu's uncertain eyes, Zhao Feng and the others rushed back. What went on? What went on? Instructor Liu took Zhao Feng aside. A few seconds later, Instructor Liu was choked by his own saliva. On the other side, Zhang Li looked at her brother, grinned, and said, Brother, when did you become so powerful? Your brother was great a long time ago, Xian replied with a smile. You will understand it later. By the way, do you want me to make you better? Zhang Han said with a smile. Me? Can I do that? I'm so weak. Zhang Li shook her head like a rattle. She didn't want to take part in exhausting training every day. Zhang Han knew what she thought and couldn't help laughing. It won't be very exhausting, he said. Then you will know. With that, Zhang Han looked to the right. A figure came very quickly, arrived at the shore, and jumped onto the boat. Director. Instructor Liu hurriedly said hello. Hello. Lieutenant nodded, looked at Meng Meng in Zhang Han's arms and said with a smile, what a cute little gal. Meng Meng's eyes were wide open for a while, and then she shyly buried her head in Zhang Han's neck. Looking at Lieutenant curiously, she whispered in Zhang Han's ear, Papa, Papa, why is he so dark? Lieutenant froze at that point. His skin was specially tanned to this bronze color, making him strong and healthy, but now it was disliked by the little girl. Xian, Zif, and Zhang Li were stunned at first, and then chuckled. It's okay, children say what they like. Lieutenant waved politely. Hardly had Lieutenant's voice faded away than Zhang Han burst into laughter and said, you are dark for sure. All right, you are so frank. Lieutenant couldn't speak anymore. Looking at Zhang Han and Meng Meng, he thought, isn't my specially tanned skin charming? After thinking about it, Lieutenant shook his head and smiled to show that he didn't mind it. Then he began talking about the matter. Have you always been so powerful, or have you just advanced to this level? After that, Lieutenant waved and felt that his question was a little impolite. After all, everyone had their own secrets. So he asked directly, Are you interested in being second in charge? Second in charge? Zhang Han was surprised. Yes, the second director of the National Security Agency of Hong Kong. Lieutenant rubbed his palm expectantly, saying, the treatment will definitely satisfy you, and there are many other benefits. If you join us, the National Security Agency of Hong Kong will be stronger. Come on, I'm not interested in that. Zhang Han shook his head slightly. Don't be in a hurry to refuse me. Lieutenant said helplessly, I asked many old friends for help in order to investigate your parents' affairs. I lent you the 5 elements furnace, and I'm here to support you today, now that I've helped you a lot. Would you reconsider my invitation? Zhang Han pondered, then finally nodded. Okay, I'll think about it. However, in Lieutenant's view, Zhang Han's think about it was equivalent to his promise. When Zhang Han came back from Xihang, he found the director's token was sent to his restaurant along with many other items. Ha ha ha. Lieutenant laughed and said, let me talk to you about the business. Though you can suppress UI with your strength, you'd better take softer measures this time. After all, UI is supported by Emperor King, Lieutenant said seriously. All the people around looked at them in silence. Even Meng was looking around curiously, not knowing what they were talking about. Emperor King? Asked Zhang Han. He had heard the name several times. When he thought of Xuanhuan's words, he said casually, Emperor King hasn't advanced to the level of Grand Master yet, has he? Who told you he hasn't advanced? Lieutenant was surprised. Master Gu, Zhang Han replied. What can he know? He just talks nonsense. Lieutenant curled his lip and said, if he were not gifted to the extreme, we would not acknowledge his title. Lieutenant glanced around and lowered his voice. We call him Emperor King because the King Dragon blood has awoken in him, and he is gifted enough to surpass his contemporaries with all the cultivation methods he inherited. He advanced to the Wudao Grandmaster stage 2 years ago, and the middle stage of Grandmaster 1 year ago. Now he is in the process of another closed-door cultivation and will definitely advance to the late stage of Grandmaster. He's so talented that advancing is as simple as eating and drinking water for him. In a few years, he will surely be at the top of the martial arts world. He has some connections with UI, therefore, UI can always maintain his position in the martial arts world as an early-stage Grandmaster. Although you are also a genius, you should be cautious sometimes. After all, you have your family. Lieutenant said a lot in one breath. King Dragon blood? Zhang Han's eyes narrowed slightly as he said, it's not bad indeed. Not bad? Lieutenant was confused. Isn't the King Dragon blood horrible? Emperor King is 100-year rare genius. How can Zhang Han regard him as just not bad? When Zhang Han said this, it was as if a senior was appreciating a junior. Lieutenant didn't know what to say. So he shook his head and decided to leave. Before he said goodbye, Zhang Han nodded his head and gave Lieutenant a faint smile. Well, we're going to catch a plane. You go back, said Zhang Han. Lieutenant's palm slightly shook as he said in a slightly complaining tone, then I'll go. Then he got off of the boat, feeling that Zhang Han was a bit rude. Behind him, the boat headed straight for the international airport. Lieutenant looked at the back of the boat and suddenly laughed. Good boy, the second director of the National Security Agency. With him, the National Safety Administration of Hong Kong will be impregnable. I don't know what stage he is in. Anyway, it must be the peak middle stage or the later stage. What a young but horrible man. Even I would lose to him without playing my trump card. But, what's his trump card? I hope that he can grow to be a match for Emperor King and bring enjoyment to the martial arts world. The legends of Zhang Han in the south and Emperor King in the north may be passed down through the ages. Thinking about it, Lieutenant shook his head and sighed. Though in his life, he could not reach the realm of those two talents and enjoyed the great reputation as the best of his contemporaries, he could witness the rise of another new star, which was not bad. He already knew Zhang Han well. Although he was still curious about some things about Zhang Han, he would not ask about them. Zhang Han's character and code of conduct were satisfactory to the elders of the martial arts world. Sold down and recommended him for the position of second director, and leading Kader Liu was willing to acknowledge him as a general and help him a lot. All of this was not only because of Zhang Han's strength, but also because of his character. If Zhang Han were a villain, he would not be treated like this even if he was powerful enough. Zhang Han and the others arrived at the airport, waited for a moment, and then got on the plane to Xihang. Before getting on the plane, Zhang Han waved to Zhao Feng. "Buy a private plane when we get back to Hong Kong," he ordered. "Okay." Zhao Feng nodded first and then froze. "Master. Do we have enough money?" "Well, money is not a problem. When we get back to Hong Kong, we'll go to salvage a sunken ship. There are many things in it." "Huh?" Zhao Feng was surprised. "Well, I really don't have to worry about money." After getting on the plane, those from Strange Peak Island went back and publicized the shocking news on the way. He Qingshan was killed because of the strength gap. Elder Hong was also killed before he could defend himself. The news, like a hurricane, swept across the entire martial arts world of Hong Kong and continued to spread to surrounding areas. The death of Elder Hong was not particularly shocking, but He Qingshan was the 17th ranked master of the Hong Kong martial arts list for 10 years. What was more frightening was the winner was a young martial artist in his 20s. If they didn't know the specific situation, many of them would think that Emperor King had come to Hong Kong, but that was not the case. Therefore, they remembered a name after the competition: Zhang Han Yang, in Mansion 3 in New Moon Bay. Hong Kitao and Tang Jie were receiving an old friend. Lin Shan dashed into the hall. "Brother Hong, I just heard that He Qingshan died. He was easily killed by Zhang Han Yang." Zhang Han Yang is Zhang Han, who used to be called Master Zhang of New Moon Bay. "He's been here." Poof! Hong Kitao's big mouthful of tea was sprayed on the ground again. Finally, he and Tang Jie decided not to leave Hong Kong temporarily. They wanted to stay here and maintain a good relationship with Xian. Hong Kitao was sure that his family would have no worries in 100 years because of this relationship. In this way, even after his death, he could proudly go to see his ancestors. At the same time, he decided on a family rule. All members of the Hong family, regardless of their status, must treat the Xian's family respectfully. Those who disobeyed would be expelled from the Hong family. Within 2 hours, another startling piece of news was spread. Zhang Han Yang, the former protector Zhang, is appointed as the second director of the National Security Agency of Hong Kong. Director Zhang. This title was beyond many martial artists' reach. At the same time, many big families had decided to be more friendly toward the National Safety Administration from now on. In just 2 months, Zhang Han had entrenched himself in Hong Kong. The protagonist of all of this news was talking and laughing on the plane to Xihang. Because she slept late and got up early, Meng fell asleep soon after she got on the plane. Chapter 398, Martial Arts Family. After Meng fell asleep near the window, Zhang Han gently covered the little girl with a small blanket. He looked at Meng tenderly, as if she were more precious than those rare treasures. This was a father's love. "Honey, honey." Xian took Zhang Han's arm. When he turned around and leaned his head over, Xian whispered, "What are you going to do with Meng? What am I going to do?" Zhang Han was confused. "About cultivation." Xian pursed her lips and said, "Before getting on the plane today, Meng asked what a grandmaster was. Explain it to her. After all, Meng will definitely become a cultivator," Zhang Han said casually. Although Meng was not a son, as time went on, Zhang Han had been transformed by modern society and began to like his daughter, and the angel-like girl made him feel great. Besides, Meng's talent was even better than that of many boys, and Zhang Han was looking forward to seeing his daughter defeat all the divine children after they returned to the cultivation world. Thinking of this, Zhang Han was more excited than he was when he became the Han Yang Immortal. "No way." Xian shook her head and said, "Before the age of 7, Babies are all in a period of personality finalization. Meng Meng is still in the stage of getting to know the world, and is not suitable for developing such a supernatural ability. What if she had an accident while playing with other children? I think it's better for her to stay away from cultivation for the time being. Besides, you don't know anything about parenting except for how to dote on Meng Meng, which annoys me the most. You have to listen to me when it comes to raising and educating Meng Meng. Looking at Xian's serious face, Zhang Han nodded as he wanted to laugh and weep all at once. Okay, it's up to you, said Zhang Han. Xian smiled contentedly, looking around with big eyes, and finding no one paying attention to them, she quickly leaned over her head and kissed Zhang Han on his left cheek. It's your reward, whispered Xian with her pleasant voice. Huh. Zhang Han looked at Xian with her long hair, who was specially dressed today. She was wearing a white blouse, black slacks, and beige coat, looking dignified, fashionable, and gorgeous. Zhang Han's tone became aggressive as he whispered, I want a more attractive reward. Staring blankly at Zhang Han, Xian slowly moved her eyes down and stopped at Zhang Han's lower body. She suddenly realized what Zhang Han meant and covered her lips with one hand. No way. She grumbled coyly. Zhang Han grinned when he saw Xian blushing. Xian was so pure she knew little about men and women. But it made Zhang Han feel that it was more interesting, for he could unlock one posture after another slowly. He believed that one day, Xian would be willing to wear sexy lingerie and Zhang Han's teasing reminded Xian of what happened in the hotel that day, and her face turned redder. She blinked her big eyes and looked around, relieved to see no one looking this way. Looking at the sleeping Zhang Li, she blinked her eyes quickly, looked at Zhang Han again, and asked seriously, by the way, I haven't seen your parents. Do you have any pictures? There are some in my cloud. Zhang Han nodded and took out his mobile phone. No networking in flight mode. If you have looked at the photos, there should be a cache in the gallery. Look for it, said Xian. Oh, Zhang Han searched for a while. Yes, this is my family photo. Zhang Han handed the mobile phone to Xian, showing her the photo of him, Zhang Li, and their parents. You used to be dignified and strong. When Xian saw Zhang Han in the picture with flat hair, she couldn't help laughing. You and uncle are very similar, and auntie is so beautiful. They look so young. Yeah, they look younger than they really are. My mother is very kind and has a very good temperament. As for my father, he was very tough and strict with me when I was young. I was beaten by him many times because of mischief. Zhang Han could still remember several times when he was very naughty and got his ass kicked by his father. Tell me about your childhood, Xian said curiously. I was naughty as a child, Zhang Han replied in a soft voice of reminiscence. I've heard from some relatives that I didn't like to be quiet when I was still a suckling child, and my mother had to walk around with me in her arms every day. When I grew up a little, I began making trouble with my friends. When I was 5 years old, I took the lead in skipping class and going out to play. I asked the teacher for sugar and put several pieces of gum on the teacher's seat. Later, I didn't think it was exciting enough, and thus applied glue on the chair. I remember one time a female teacher came to class. Poof, you're such a bad boy. Xian couldn't help laughing. So I was beaten by my father and I knew that I had gone too far, so I began to play something else. Later, I went to live in the countryside for 3 years and made more friends. We played glass marbles, jumped rubber bands, threw shoes, vaulted, and played with mud after the rain. I used to make the mud into a bowl shape, throw it on the ground, and make a banging sound. In addition, we often played hide and seek. I remember that one time during the spring festival, it was my turn to find the other children. When they all hid, I went home for dinner. After dinner, I went to call them and found that they were still hiding in their original place. You are too naughty. Xian felt it very funny and said, I only saw that kind of rural life on TV. Let's try it when we have a chance. Okay. The environment in the countryside is much better than when I was a child. otherwise you will not be able to stay there for long. The toilets used to be in the open air, and we had to go out at night. When I came back, there were welts bitten by the mosquitoes on my buttocks. I counted them at that time. I went to the toilet for 4 minutes and got 17 mosquito bites. Xian's face shrunk, imagining what Zhang Han had described. She also felt like she was bitten by a mosquito. You used to be naughty. When did you stop being naughty? Xian then asked. I was naughty and rebellious until I was 16, and I often fought and made troubles for my parents. However, a small matter later had a great impact on me, Zhang Han replied. What was it? I remember that on my 16th birthday, I asked my mother for 100,000 yuan to go out and have fun with my friends, but my father wanted to take us to visit an important friend. I didn't like it and even hit a plate to the ground angrily at lunch, but at that time, my father just forced us to go with him without saying anything about my behavior. We visited an old man in the suburbs, who felt my and my sister's pulse, but I mocked him as a liar, which made my father embarrassed. As Zhang Han spoke, there was a weird light in his eyes. My father took me out of the house alone and sat down in a pond where there were many ducks swimming. He pointed to the duck on the left and asked what it was. I replied impatiently, "It's a duck." He pointed to the duck on the right and asked what it was. I said more impatiently, "Didn't I just finish? It's a duck." Then my father pointed to the center again and asked what it was. I couldn't help getting angry and I shouted, "Duck, that's a duck. How can you not even know a duck? Why do you always ask?" I said it 100 times. When I finished yelling, my father fell into silence, and I turned my head while wheezing and gasping. I was in a bad mood because I couldn't go out to have fun. He always asked me questions, which made me angrier. But after a few minutes of silence, my father took out his mobile phone and showed me a video recorded when I was a child. It was also in the countryside and by the pond. I sat next to my father and pointed to the duck with a smile and asked, "What is that?" My father replied that it was a duck. I pointed to another one. "What is it?" My father replied that it was a duck. There were 23 ducks in the pond, and I pointed 23 times. My father replied 23 times, and every time he replied, he had a gentle smile on his face. Then I suddenly understood something and admitted my fault to my father. I still remember the warmth in my dad's eyes, and it felt like he was going somewhere, but he was reluctant to leave us. It was not until now that I realized that he wanted to say more with that look. Zhang Han fell into his memories. He could always feel his father's deep love. Now that he was a father, he had a deeper understanding of it. At that time, his father must have had something that he couldn't say, and it might be related to his disappearance, which was still a mystery. But Zhang Han was sure he'd unveil the mystery one day, and resentment for resentment, hatred for hatred. Xian pursed her lips and felt the topic was a little serious. "I'll show you a picture of my parents." She started to talk about something relaxing. They chatted all the time, and the time passed quickly. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning, and they would arrive at Xihang soon. As the provincial city of province, Xihang was not only a sub-provincial city, but also the political, economic, cultural, educational, and financial center of province. This well-developed city was one of the most important e-commerce centers in Hua Nation, where Mr. Sheng's new technology was located. There were a lot of natural and cultural landscapes and relics in Xihang, but Zhang Han only came here once and only remembered one dish called West Lake fish in vinegar gravy, which tasted good. "Papa, Mama, we are going to stop. I can see things on the ground." Meng looked outside the window and mumbled, "Let's go out for fun in the afternoon," Zhang Han said with a smile. "Great." Meng happily waved her little palm and said, "Papa, I'll get gifts for Big Hi and Little Hi this time." "All right, Meng can choose the gifts by herself." Zhang Han reached out and touched the little girl's head. "Well, I'll choose carefully." Meng Meng nodded seriously. Xian couldn't help laughing and shaking her head. Meng Meng, Dai, and Little Hai were really good friends. Xian had been convinced that many dogs were free of harmful bacteria, and she was more relieved to let the little girl play with them. Soon after, the plane began to land. In general, there would be weightlessness when landing and sometimes tinnitus. But with Zhang Han's company, Xian and Meng Meng didn't feel uncomfortable at all. They just felt the plane land on the ground smoothly. "Wow, what a sound sleep," said Zhang Li and Zif. They both stretched when they got off the plane. Sleepiness seemed to be contagious. Seeing Zhang Li sleeping soundly, Zif soon fell asleep, so that they didn't feel bored on the journey. After they got off the plane, 10 people, including Zhao Feng and Leng Yi, guarded them on both sides. With Meng Meng in his arms, Zhang Han took Xian's hand and led the way, followed by Zuf and Zhang Li. Many people were confused at the scene and thought a big shot was arriving. Before they left the airport, Zhang Li's cell phone rang. "Hello, Auntie, we just got off the plane and we're going out." "I see. Okay, Auntie." Hanging up the phone, Zhang Li said, "Brother, Auntie has been waiting outside. Let's go out to the far right to see her." "Okay." Zhang Han nodded. They walked out of the airport and looked to the right. There were 6 people standing about 50 meters away with a motorcade not far behind them. There were 8 or 9 Land Rovers in the team, led by a limousine. The first 2 looked to be in their early 40s. With Zhang Han's good eyesight, he recognized that the woman was Rong Jiaxin, his aunt. She was about 1.65 meters tall, with a horsetail, willow eyebrows, and big eyes. She had a beautiful appearance and some similarities to Zhang Han's mother, but there were a few crow's feet at the corners of her eyes, which was a trace of time passing. Next to her stood a middle-aged man of about 1.75 meters. He was well-proportioned and dressed in a black coat, with a little white hair on both sides of his forehead and eyebrows. In addition, there were 2 men and 2 women of middle age, who should be the relatives of Zhang Han's uncle-in-law. It seemed that the relationship between the 2 families was pretty good. Under the protection of Zhao Feng and others, Zhang Han and his friends walked over to them smoothly. Zhang Li waved her arm and said loudly, "Aunt." Rong Jiaxin and the others looked at them in surprise, feeling that her nephew seemed to have a good life. A few days ago, after learning that Zhang Han had been expelled from the Zhang family, Rong Jiaxin was very angry. Unexpectedly, Zhang Han had not only married and had children, but also seemed to have a good life. She was more looking forward to today's reunion. Seeing them coming, Rong Jiaxin took the lead to take a few steps forward. "Aunt." Zhang Li jumped forward a few steps, holding Rong Jiaxin's arm and laughing. "Well, Lilai, I haven't seen you in years. You are so beautiful now," Rong Jiaxin said happily. "I've always been beautiful," Zhang Li said with a smile. Zhang Han and the others also stopped. He could feel that Xian was a little nervous because she was holding his hand tightly. "Han, I'm so happy that you're married in the twinkling of an eye. Is this pretty girl your wife?" Rong Jiaxin looked at them with a complex and happy mood and said with a smile, "Yes." Zhang Han smiled and said, "Aunt, uncle, I'd like to introduce Xian, my wife, to you." Rong Jiaxin and her husband Wang Ming were a little confused. They felt that the name Xian was a little familiar, but they didn't remember where they had heard it. "Nice to meet you, aunt and uncle." Xian quickly took off her sunglasses and said hello with a smile. "Wow!" Seeing Xian without sunglasses, even Rong Jiaxin was amazed at her beauty. "She's so beautiful, Han, your wife is so beautiful, I envy you so much." "Yes." Wang Ming shook his head and smiled. "I often hear Jiaxin talk about you and Lilai. You are both promising young people indeed." Zhang Han chuckled, ready to introduce Meng Meng to them. The little girl had already stretched out her little arm, pouted her little mouth, and said, "And me, and me. What's your name then?" Rong Jiaxin's eyes were full of love for the little angel. "My name is Zhang Yumen. They all call me Meng Meng." Meng Meng said seriously. Hearing this, Zhang Han smiled and said, Meng Meng, they are your grandaunt and granduncle. Oh. Meng Meng said, nice to meet you, grandaunt and granduncle. What a good girl. I've got a present for you. Let's get in the car first. Rong Jiaxin gave Meng Meng a sweet smile, and then she patted her forehead. I'm so happy that I forgot to introduce them. This is my husband's brother Wang Gang, this is his wife, and this is brother Wang Liang. Good to see you. Wang Gang shook hands with Zhang Han with a smile and said, let's get in the car first. It's 11 o'clock now, and I'll send someone to prepare lunch. Don't rush, I'll go out later, Zhang Han responded. Then they got in the car, while Zhang Han and his family followed Rong Jiaxin and Wang Ming to get in the limousine. The others seated themselves in the Land Rovers. The motorcade left the airport slowly. Zhang Han checked the chi of these people. In addition to his aunt's sister-in-law, the other relatives were all martial artists. It seemed that his aunt had married into a martial arts family. It was a little surprising that Rong Jiaxin was a heaven stage master, though she could not control her chi well, which meant that she had recently advanced to this stage. Wang Ming, her husband, was also a heaven stage master, and it seemed that he had been in this stage for a long time, while Wang Liang, his brother, was a profound stage master. Wang Liang's wife was at the stage of inward strength. As for the eldest brother, Wang Gang, he seemed to have restrained his chi to avoid exposing his strength. But Zhang Han could sense that he was probably at the top of the heaven stage and close to the level of Grandmaster. Although Zhang Han could check Wang Gang's strength with his soul sense, it would be detected by Wang Gang, and Zhang Han was not interested in doing so. After getting in the car, Rong Jiaxin took out a big and a small gift box from her bag and handed them to Ziyan. Yan, it's the first time I've met you, so here is a small gift for you. She smiled. Thank you, Aunt. Ziyan took it with a smile. Open it and see if you like the style. If you don't like it, I'll change it for you, said Rong Jiaxin with a smile. Ziyan opened the two boxes and saw two necklaces. They were made of silver, very thin and inconspicuous, but the emerald pendants were so beautiful in the shape of a crescent moon. They are beautiful, said Ziyan pleasantly. Is this mine? It's pretty. Meng Meng held out her small hand, grabbed the smaller necklace and said, how nice. Zhang Han picked up the pendants in Ziyan's hand and looked at them. Inside the small nail-sized jade, someone had carved a small array, and both of them were refreshing arrays, which would give the wearers a good sleep and indirectly relieve their fatigue. Han, you will have the same necklace, which is a little larger than theirs, but I haven't finished it yet. You can stay here for a few more days, and I'll give it to you when I've finished, Wang Ming said with a smile. Zhang Han chuckled and said, thank you so much for your kindness. His uncle-in-law seemed to know something about arrays. Chapter 399, I'm looking for you. Why? Han, Yan, just take auntie's home as yours and stay for a few more days. I watched you grow up and I'm glad that you got married. Rong Jiaxin shook her head with a smile and said, I don't know when you got married. Is Meng Meng 4 years old? We're not married yet. Ziyan slightly pursed her lower lip and replied. Huh? Rong Jiaxin was stunned and said. Meng Meng is 4 years old. Why haven't you gotten married? Yes, that's your fault, Han. Ziyan has given birth to such a lovely daughter, and you must live up to her love. You should make her your legal wife as soon as possible, Wang Ming said. Zhang Han shook his head and said, when I find out about my parents and get them back, we'll get married. How can you do that? Even Rong Jiaxin said in a loud voice, well, in my opinion, you'd better get married first. Meng Meng has grown up, and you can't delay it anymore. It's not funny. Hearing Rong Jiaxin's words, Zhang Han asked directly, Auntie, do you have any news about my parents? I don't know exactly, and no one knows when we'll get news of them. You can't go on like this all the time. Rong Jiaxin had made it clear that she could be the elder to witness the wedding of the two and hoped to do so, but that was not what Zhang Han wanted. Although his aunt had a good relationship with his parents, they could never be replaced by others. Zhang Han was not afraid of any hostile forces. After all, he had been fighting for hundreds of years in the cultivation world, and suppressed 10 super sects and clans during this period, each of which was full of masters. But now, no hostile forces were interfering with his search for parents. He just had no news of them, which was the only problem he faced. Even Zhang Han couldn't help it. He didn't even know where to start looking for the news of those two. At this time, he could only hope that Ui would give him some specific information. Hearing Rong Jiaxin's words, Xian also smiled and said, "It doesn't matter. I believe that Zhang Han will find his parents, and then we can get married." This. Rong Jiaxin looked at Xian with guilt and sighed. Han really married a good girl. He's very good, and I'm happy to be with him. Xian smiled sweetly. The conversation between adults confused Meng Meng. To get married? Meng Meng said vaguely, "Haven't Papa and Mama gotten married yet? Then, why do I exist?" Huh. The adults around her were stunned and didn't know how to answer the question for a while. Xian felt that this matter was a little indescribable. She used to see the news that the children of a newly married couple went to their parents' wedding, which was interesting. But now the same thing was going to happen to her, and her feelings were so complicated. When Mom and Dad get married, you can take a picture with us with flowers in your hands. It must be very beautiful. Zhang Han smiled and touched Meng Meng's little head. Take flowers, take photos, beautiful. Meng Meng smiled. Rong Jiaxin loved Meng Meng so much that she had been playing with the little girl the whole way. She didn't even have time to chat with Zhang Han. At first, Meng Meng was a little shy, but later she had a good time and even sang a song to her grand aunt. It took about half an hour to get to the destination. The main residence of the Wang family of Xihang was a small manor in Binjian district, which was close to a river and had beautiful scenery. This was a small manor consisting of 13 one-story buildings. Some of the buildings were modern and some were retro, and the distance between them was different. There was a quadrangle-type building in the innermost part, which was the old and main house of the Wang family elders. The car stopped near the 3 buildings on the right side, while the ancient building in the center was the residence of Rong Jiaxin's family. The modern house on the right side was arranged for Zhang Han's family. The slightly longer house on the left side was a guest house with 6 rooms, which could accommodate Zhao Feng and the others. 50 meters farther inside, there was a building with French windows on 3 sides. It was the Wang's restaurant, where the family usually ate, apart from having dinner together. The Wang family had irregular breakfast and lunch. After all, according to the elders, the young people were night owls. How could they get up early to eat breakfast? Zhao Feng and the others, under the guidance of the housekeeper, put Xian's suitcase and Zhang Li's and Zif's luggage in the arranged rooms, and then returned to the room to quickly arrange their own luggage. Zhang Han went to Rong Jiaxin's residence, which looked retro, but the decoration inside was very refreshing and unique with modern-styled white floor tiles, sofas, and chandeliers. Han, sit down first and have some tea, I'll call ya. When Rong Jiaxin spoke, there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. Then she went to the bedroom in the corridor on the right. Zhang Han also remembered his cousin, who was 3 years younger than himself. He met this lively little girl when he was 13 or 14. It wasn't long before Rong Jiaxin came out with Wang Ya. Wang Ya's hair was a little messy and her face was haggard, as if she hadn't woken up yet. When she saw Zhang Han and the others, she kept up her spirits, gave out a smile, and came over to say hello. Nice to meet you, cousins. Wang Yaxian said hello to Zhang Han and Zhang Li, then sat on the sofa, looked at Xian and said, nice to meet you, cousin-in-law. Nice to meet you. Xian smiled and greeted her. Ya has grown up, more beautiful than before, Zhang Han said with a smile. My cousin-in-law is really beautiful. Wang Ya smiled and looked at Meng Meng. Suddenly, she felt lost and sad, and her eyes quivered, but she soon adjusted her mood, smiled and said, is she your daughter? What a beautiful, Lovely girl, what's your name? I'm Meng Meng. After chatting with Meng Meng, Wang Ya looked at Xian in doubt and said, cousin, you look familiar, as if I have seen you somewhere. Well, my name is Xian, Xian replied. Wang Ming and Rong Jiaxin were elders, and Xian thought it was normal that they didn't know her, but Wang Ya should have heard her name. Hearing Xian's name, Wang Ya was shocked. Xian? Then her eyes lit up as she said in a surprised voice, oh, you are Xian, you are my cousin-in-law. What a coincidence, brother. When did you succeed in chasing her? Well, not long ago. It was hard to pursue her. Zhang Han joked. Xian rolled her eyes at Zhang Han. What was the meaning of hard to pursue her? Zhang Han had merely pursued her once and she immediately accepted him. But, the fireworks were so beautiful. Zhang Han was romantic and gentle to Xian and Meng Meng. How could Xian refuse him? You're lying to me, even your baby has grown up. Wang Ya smiled and looked at Rong Jiaxin excitedly. Mum and Dad, you certainly don't know that my cousin-in-law is a famous star, the national goddess. Really? Rong Jiaxin looked at Xian happily and said, you are a superstar? Han is so lucky to marry you. I'm not very famous, I'm still developing. Xian chuckled. Well, now that she is a superstar. Wang Ming wanted to say something. He hesitated because he knew that the entertainment industry was a mess and that there were not many long and happy marriages. Seeing Wang Ming's expression, Wang Ya knew what he was thinking, so she added, Xian used to be a noble and cold goddess with no scandal at all, so she retired 5 years ago because of Zhang Han, and she even gave birth to a baby for him. I envy it. After that, Wang Ya looked at Meng Meng with love in her eyes. Rong Jiaxin sighed and looked at Wang Ya with a little pity. Wang Ya's mental state was not very good, and this scene made Zhang Han feel a little different. According to the occasional expressions of Rong Jiaxin and Wang Ming, Wang Ya seemed to be living on an emotional tightrope. After thinking about it, Zhang Han gave up asking and prepared to do his own business. However, sitting on Xian's leg, Meng Meng pouted. My mama is very beautiful, my papa is very powerful, said the little girl with a lovely expression. The little girl's words caused a burst of laughter. After saying hello, Zif sat aside in silence. 5 minutes later, Rong Jiaxin checked the time and said, Ming, it's 11:30 now, have them prepare lunch. Okay, Han, wait a moment, I'll arrange it. Wang Ming stood up and prepared to arrange a rich lunch. Zhang Han shook his head slightly and said, I have something to do first. What's up? Can you go there after dinner? Let your aunt and uncle show you around in the afternoon. Rong Jiaxin was surprised and said, I can't rest assured until I do it first. Zhang Han chuckled and looked at Xian. Would you like to stay here and eat first? Xian pondered and nodded. Okay, then be careful. I'll have dinner with you when you come back. Well, I'll be back as soon as possible. Zhang Han nodded and stood up. Where do you want to go, Han? Asked Rong Jiaxin. To the Qingfeng sect and find you. Why? Replied Zhang Han. You are looking for Chief. Rong Jiaxin was confused. For what? To ask about my parents. He seems to know something. Zhang Han replied. He knows something? Really? Why haven't I heard of it? Rong Jiaxin was stunned and asked, who told you that? Ltanan, he can't lie. Ltanan. Ah? Wang Ming repeated the name twice, and suddenly stared at Zhang Han with surprise. Isn't he director of Hong Kong, the great master ranked 11th on the martial artist list? You know him, Han? This. Rong Jiaxin suddenly felt that Xuanhuan had developed very well. He knew the martial arts world, knew Ltanan, and came to find Chief. After pondering, Rong Jiaxin said, it may be difficult for you to enter the Qingfeng sect, for the chief and the elders don't like to see strangers. Let us send a visiting card to them first. Don't bother yourself with it, just give me a car. Zhang Han refused her. Then, let your uncle take you, added Rong Jiaxin. Though she was curious about Zhang Han, She didn't ask him too much and decided to talk about it when they were all free in the evening. Wang Ming nodded at her words and said, "Let me take you the, Han." "Okay." Zhang Han nodded. When they were going out, Meng Meng hurriedly said, "Papa, what are you doing?" "Meng Meng also wants to go with you. Dad's going to ask something. I'll be back soon." Zhang Han touched her little head with a smile and said, "Would you like to stay here with your mother and wait for Dad to come back?" "Meng Meng, wait for Papa with Mom. He'll be back soon. Mama will let you have some snacks." Ziyan pinched Meng Meng's face and said, "Really?" Meng Meng's big eyes lit up. "Okay, I'll wait for Papa to come back. Papa, hurry up." "Okay." Zhang Han smiled and went out with Wang Ming. As soon as he went out, he heard the voice of the little girl. "I'm going to have snacks. I'd like to have ice cream, potato chips, and seaweed." Meng Meng's words made Zhang Han laugh. "What a lovely girl. Cherish the happy time now. Time flies too fast, and she will grow up and marry someone in a flash. If she marries into a good family, it's okay. If not, ah." Wang Ming sighed deeply. Zhang Han's expression froze. He was silent because he didn't want to talk about it. They went to the small parking lot in front of the yard, got in a black Bentley, left the villain area slowly, and drove all the way to the northeast. "Han, how many years have you been together?" Wang Ming asked curiously. "About 5 years. Is she still in the entertainment business?" "I've heard that circle is a mess," Wang Ming said, warning Zhang Han at the same time. "Let her have fun as long as she likes it. I support her." Zhang Han smiled. "Now that she goes out to work, too, who will take care of Meng Meng at home? It is better for children to be taken care of and educated by their parents." Obviously, Zhao Feng and the other men were not ordinary. Zhang Han had to be very rich to hire such bodyguards, and maybe he had his own company to run. If Ziyan also went out to work, would they have the nanny look after Meng Meng? Wang Ming thought it was not appropriate. "I look after Meng Meng at home, well, full time. A stay-home dad?" Wang Ming was stunned at once. His mouth was slightly shaken, and a terrible guess came into his mind. There was a red light at the intersection. Wang Ming turned his head slowly and hesitated. You, Han, did you marry into Ziyan's family?" Originally, he wanted to ask Zhang Han if he was raised by Ziyan, which sounded impolite, so he reorganized his words. Zhang Han was a little surprised and felt it so funny when he understood Wang Ming's meaning. Shaking his head, Zhang Han refused to answer the ridiculous question. However, Zhang Han's silence made Wang Ming think he had guessed the truth. Since Zhang Han didn't refute, he acquiesced. Alas! Wang Ming sighed. "Han's life is not easy. Your aunt is very optimistic about you and often talks about you. Although your uncle's family is not the top family, we indeed have a good reputation and some influence in Xihang. Han, you'd better think about your aunt's words, and I'll visit Ziyan's house with your aunt later." In other words, Wang Ming was comforting Zhang Han that though it was difficult for him to marry into Ziyan's family, his aunt and uncle would be his firm dependents. Zhang Han didn't explain. Wang Ming had such a misunderstanding just because he didn't know much about Zhang Han's family. In a few days, he would realize that he was wrong. As they chatted, they left the city, drove for half an hour in the suburbs, turned left and right, and finally arrived at the place where the Qingfeng sect was located. "I had the honor to visit the Qingfeng sect with my father a few years ago. We'll be there in 5 minutes, but they may not see us today. What's more, we are going to visit Chief Yi, and we should be more respectful." Before entering, Wang Ming warned Zhang Han. "Is Ui very powerful?" asked Zhang Han casually. "Wait, you can't call him by his full name. You have to call him Chief Yi," said Wang Ming with a stiff expression. "Keep in mind that Ui's backstage supporter is Emperor King. Though the Qingfeng sect is a small sect, it has a high position because of this relationship and can even be in the top 5 of Xihang. Of course, It is also due to their being in harmony with the rest of the world and their relatively incompetent disciples. Some years ago, when a treasure was found, the Qingfeng sect, like other sects, would send some disciples to fight for it, but they fought for 3 years and never won, which brought them the nickname Passerby sect. Ui felt very disgraceful, so he decided not to compete against the other sects at all. He had the disciples of the sect practice martial arts in a down-to-earth way, and the whole sect was now living a very leisurely life. Wang Ming knew that although he was merely at the top of the heaven stage, he could be an elder if he joined the Qingfeng sect. While Ui was the only Grand Master in the Qingfeng sect, his 3 elders were all heaven stage masters. As for his disciples, their strength was really uneven, ranging from obvious strength to earth stage. Of course, Wang Ming knew that with his own strength, he could not compete with the 3 elders. As for Ui, after all, he was a great master worthy of respect. Therefore, Wang Ming decided to warn Zhang Han again. This time, he thought, if they were lucky, they would be allowed in. If they were not, it didn't matter. But he was wrong. When they crossed a canyon, they saw the Qingfeng sect, like a large temple, which was composed of many buildings and guarded by 2 disciples in front of the gate. "Hello, I'm Wang Ming from the Wang family. I'm here to visit Chief," said Wang Ming when they approached the gate. One of the gatekeepers glanced at them and said, "Please go back. The chief is not here." "Is the first elder there?" asked Wang Ming. "The first elder is meditating and will not see anyone." "What about the second elder? I wonder if the second elder has time." "The second elder is not free, he is teaching his disciples." Wang Ming felt a little helpless and said, "I wonder if the third elder is willing to see us. Just leave your visiting card here, and maybe they will be free one day." That disciple was a little impatient, but he didn't get a chance to finish speaking. Whoosh! The bodies of the 2 gatekeepers suddenly soared over the 3-meter-high wall and fell into it. Wang Ming went blank. What is going on? Just now, he only felt that before the 2 disciples were lifted up, a kind of energy suddenly appeared under their feet. What's up? He didn't notice that it was Zhang Han who did it. "Go inside," said Zhang Han with a smile. He took the lead and walked into the sect. He didn't hurt the 2 disciples at the inward strength stage, but just made them fall. Wang Ming followed in with confusion. As soon as the 2 disciples got up, they saw Zhang Han coming in. They turned pale with fear and ran to the inner courtyard in a panic. About 1 minute later, Wang Ming fully understood what had happened. He heard shrill cries from the inner court. "The enemy is coming. Guard the sect and follow me to kill enemies." Whoosh! More than 50 disciples rushed out of the gate of the inner courtyard, with swords and sticks in their hands. They all stared at Zhang Han and Wang Ming warily and nervously. "Eldest brother, that's them," cried the 2 gatekeepers, rubbing their buttocks. "Who are you?" The eldest martial brother took the lead to ask with great momentum, "Do you know where you are?" Zhang Han glanced at the crowd. He finally knew why it was called the Passerby sect. The eldest martial brother was merely at the peak strength stage. Zhang Han shook his head slightly and said, "I'm looking for you. Why?" Chapter 400, My Father's Time. "Who are you looking for?" The eldest martial brother was a little confused. He raised his eyebrows and repeated, "Ui. Why is the name so familiar?" "Ui is our sect chief's name," whispered an inward strength disciple. "PFFT, ahem." The eldest martial brother glared at Zhang Han angrily and said, "How dare you call Ui by his full name? Too arrogant, brothers." Before he finished speaking, Zhang Han gave him a joking look, and then he felt the spiritual force rushing out of this stranger's body like a huge wave, rushing at him. Whoosh! Before the eldest martial brother finished speaking, he and a group of disciples were carried into the air. They were sent over the 2-meter-high wall of the inner courtyard and plopped onto the ground. Ahem, ahem, ahem. Wang Ming almost forgot to breathe. He tried to stare so hard that his eyes almost fell out. He looked at Zhang Han with a blank face. He sensed the tremendous spiritual force that he dared not to recognize before. Now, only fools didn't know what was going on. Martial arts grandmaster? Wang Ming began to stammer. Because of the sudden astonishment, his tone became thrilling. After that, his heart beat violently, as if he held his breath in the water, and raised his head when he could not hold it. He could even hear his heart beating. In fact, for him, being a grandmaster was not an unreachable dream. After all, he was close to the Wudao grandmaster stage himself, and there were elders in his family who were grandmasters. Besides, he had seen other grandmaster strongs before. He was so shocked because of the sharp psychological contrast. Grandmaster Zhang, I'm Wang Ming from the Wang family. Wang Ming reflexively wanted to pay homage to the great man. Before he finished speaking, he realized what he was doing and could not continue. What should I call him? Damn it, I'm so embarrassed. Wang Ming hesitated and didn't know what to say. Uncle, just call me by my name, said Zhang Han with a smile as if he could read Wang Ming's mind. Aunt Rong Jiexin was one of the few relatives recognized by Zhang Han in the world, and Zhang Han was willing to respect her and Wang Ming as elders. Zhang Han would not be complacent about his achievements and despise anyone, but his attitude was different from person to person. Of course, for some people, even if they knelt down to beg Zhang Han would not spare them a glance. Everyone had his own balance, and time would prove everything. Wang Ming was relieved to hear Zhang Han's words. However, he remembered what he said on their way here. How could Zhang Han marry into the Zi family? As a Wudao grandmaster, he could establish a sect himself. Wang Ming felt like a clown today, and he was too ashamed to face anyone. Let's go inside, said Zhang Han as he led the way into the sect. At this time, the people inside also came to their senses and began to shout. Eldest brother, where are you? What can we do now? The enemy is too powerful. Retreat. Go to the elder for help. Run. Hearing these faint words, Wang Ming curled his lip. As a grandmaster, Zhang Han can defeat your first, second, and third elders at the same time. But when he thought of it, Wang Ming suddenly said, Han, you can fight. But don't hurt them too much. After all, Emperor King is the behind-the-scenes supporter of UY. Emperor King, repeated Zhang Han. Shaking his head slightly, Zhang Han realized that he had heard the name several times. They seemed to be afraid of Emperor King, but, he is just a man with King Dragon blood, replied Zhang Han calmly. There were many descendants who inherited King Dragon blood, and they had developed numerous branches with uneven strength. But Zhang Han would not be afraid of even the most powerful descendant. King Dragon blood was merely a third-stage blood in the cultivation world. As for Zhang Han himself, with the help of countless resources, he became advanced to the level of the perfect building base stage, innateness stage, 8-inch elixir stage, and then 7-inch Xuanhuan stage. Since then, he had acquired the ability to control his own natural elements, which ranked first in the second stage of the cultivation world. The first stage was only known as a legend, and for thousands of years, there might not be a person advancing to this stage. According to the legend known by Zhang Han, all the masters at this stage could easily break the laws of nature and fly to the divine realm without worrying about thunder. Zhang Han used to have a headache when he thought about this because he was killed by the divine thunder over the sky, but now he just felt lucky. Xian and Meng fascinated and enchanted him. Unexpectedly, being a father made him so happy. Of course, Wang Ming didn't know Zhang Han's history, so he was startled his nephew's words. Just a man with King Dragon blood? Just? It sounds like the King Dragon blood is so common to him. Wang Ming still didn't understand it, so he was silent along the way and followed Zhang Han to the inner court. They walked for a minute. Suddenly, a large group of people came running up from the left and right. There were about 150 armed disciples in total, and they all looked at Zhang Han warily. The three elders finally appeared, while the first elder looked at Zhang Han and asked, "Who are you?" "I'm looking for you. Why?" said Zhang Han calmly. "You broken like this and want to see the sector chief. You really look down on me." "All disciples, listen, array," said the first elder loudly. Yes. All the disciples withdrew their weapons and began to surround Zhang Han orderly. Zhang Han was surprised. They still want to fight in this situation? No wonder it is called the passerby sect. I bet they can't live a day in the cultivation world. Zhang Han had never seen such a sect. Under the command of his consciousness, the cards in his pocket flew out one by one. After being stuffed Zhang Han's spiritual force, the cards turned into a fan and roared away. Bang, 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 bang. With a series of muffled noises, the 150 disciples were knocked down in 10 seconds. The first elder was stunned. Then, the circle of the 18 cards gradually narrowed down and surrounded the 3 elders. The chilling cards almost made them tremble with fear. The eldest elder's eyelids were quivering as he said, "Hero, why are you so violent? I asked my disciples to form an array and welcome you to the main hall for a talk. You..." Zhang Han was confused. "Oh, they wanted to welcome me, so they withdrew all the weapons. I won't go in, just ask your sect chief to come out," said Zhang Han plainly. "The sect leader is really not here, and he went out half a month ago. He contacted me 3 days ago and said he would travel further," replied the first elder honestly. "Contact him?" ordered Zhang Han directly. "I can't contact him," said the first elder helplessly. "Hero, our sect chief always uses a public phone to contact us." "What?" Zhang Han raised his eyebrows slightly. The 18 cards kept coming at the 3, and eventually spun around their heads, making their sweat almost run down. "Hero, spare our lives." The second elder opened his mouth for the first time and said repeatedly, "We don't know, or we'd tell you for sure, we swear." "Am I going back empty-handed?" Zhang Han frowned and said in a deep voice, "No matter what method you use, contact UI within 3 days, or I will tear down your sect." "I see, we will try our best to contact him," the second elder quickly replied. "I dare to ask the hero, why are you looking for the sect chief?" asked the first elder with great care. "I want to ask him something, call me when you get in touch with him." With a wave of Zhang Han's hand, 11 of the 18 cards flew out and engraved a phone number on the wall. Then, Zhang Han turned around and the 18 cards flew back to his pocket in turn. While staring at Zhang Han's back, they all sighed with emotion. The second elder wiped the sweat on his head and sighed. "We are defeated once again." "Yes," the 3 elders said in muffled voices. "Fortunately, he is a grand master and we won't be humiliated when the news comes out." "Yes, but we'll be humiliated when the sect is torn down." The first elder glared at his 2 martial brothers and then comforted them. "It doesn't matter, he just wants to ask something. Let's find a way to contact the sect chief." "Yes." On the way out, Wang Ming hesitated for a long time as he wanted to remind Zhang Han not to use such tough means. After all, Emperor King was the behind-the-scenes supporter of the Qingfeng sect. However, Wang Ming felt a toothache at the thought of Zhang Han saying that it was just King Dragon blood. Those who could awaken their blood were all big shots. Alas, I'd better let Jiaxin persuade him after we get back. So they got in the car and drove back in silence. Halfway back, Wang Ming put on a wry smile and said, "I was worried that it was you who married into the Zi family. It seems that I thought too much. With your strength, you would be worshipped everywhere." Zhang Han shook his head slightly and said, "Ziyan and I don't have so many rules. We just want to live in peace together instead of becoming a clan. It's true that masters usually live in seclusion in downtown areas. I admire you so much. How old are you?" 27, replied Zhang Han. "A 27-year-old Wu Dao Grand Master. It's amazing, and you are indeed a genius. It may have something to do with your excellent parents. After all, there are genetic factors." Wang Ming smiled and shook his head. "Do you know about my parents, too?" asked Zhang Han. Looking at Zhang Han, Wang Ming said with nostalgia and admiration, "Of course, your father is the Lord of Battle after all." Lord of Battle? Zhang Han was surprised. "Can you tell me more about it?" Wang Ming looked at Zhang Han and said, "You and Li don't know about this, because it happened before you were born. There was a time when no Grandmaster was seen in the world, and it was said that they were all exploring a secret realm. Your father, as a heaven stage master, was invincible in all battles and made great achievements, and no one could match him below the level of Grandmaster. He kept this record for 5 years, so he was honored as the King of War. It was his time. Your mother didn't know how to cultivate, and your father helped her advance to the stage of Wudao Grandmaster after giving birth to you. However, she was defeated and seriously hurt by Geixingkong, the North Tiger, as soon as she got advanced. Then came Geixingkong's time, as a 19-year-old early-stage Grandmaster. Geixingkong wanted to break your father's record, which was difficult for him at that time because all the masters had returned, and the world had changed. Even so, he defeated 99 young talents, but unfortunately failed to an overseas master in the 100th battle. Then came the time of Emperor King. In the past 50 years, no one has been able to reach the level of Emperor King, and it can be said that he has really suppressed a generation of martial artists. At this point, Wang Ming couldn't help warning Zhang Han not to cause too much trouble in the Qingfeng sect. "My father is the Lord of Battle?" Zhang Han imagined the scene and laughed. Invincible in all battles, great achievements, and no well-matched opponent below the level of Grandmaster. He's so cool. Zhang Han could imagine his father's demeanor at that time. Yes, Zhang Wengyu, the Lord of Battle, who had also suppressed a generation of martial artists, but he was later seriously injured by a man with white hair and a youthful face, and all his meridians were broken. That man, King Zhenzi, was at least at the Grandmaster late stage, and no one knew where he came from. "If it wasn't for the warlord of the Chan clan, your father would have died," said Wang Ming with a sigh. "I always felt like you knew something." Zhang Han's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at Wang Ming. Wang Ming shook his head and gave Zhang Han a wry smile. "Even the warlord of the Chan clan didn't know where King Zhenzi came from. Only your father knows the truth, but he has never told anyone. Don't worry, you are a Wudao Grandmaster now, and you will surely solve the mystery in the future." "Oh, by the way, what's your level?" Wang Ming asked curiously. Zhang Han thought for a moment and replied, "Maybe the Grandmaster late stage." Wang Ming's expression froze. "There's a car ahead." Zhang Han pointed to the front. "Ah." Wang Ming was taken aback as he looked ahead. After braking suddenly, he stopped the car 10 cms behind the Buick in front of him. "Late stage? Oh, my, you are merely 27 years old." Wang Ming grinned and looked frightened. Zhang Han shook his head slightly. Only those who had really been in touch with genius knew what they were. Is it fair that some people were born at a high level? Is it fair that some beast was born with the strength of Yuan Ying, gifted supernatural power, and can control the natural elements? Is it fair that someone born ordinary could reach the stage of past tribulation in just 30 or 50 years and become immortals in 100 years? There will always be real geniuses born, and this injustice will always exist. They kept quiet the whole way. In fact, it was not completely quiet because Wang Ming would sigh from time to time. "Grandmaster late stage, my gosh, how do you cultivate? You are great. Amazing. Zhang Han was unable to neither laugh nor cry. If he had known this, in order to keep his peace of mind, he would not have told Wang Ming. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the two returned to the Wang family. "Papa, how can you come back so late?" "Meng Meng missed you so much," complained Meng Meng. Seeing Zhang Han enter the room, Meng Meng jumped up from the sofa and stretched out her little arm to him. Zhang Han smiled softly and went to the front to pick up the little girl. "Any news?" asked Xian with expectation. The other people also turned around to look at Zhang Han. From the previous chat, Rong Jiaxin knew that Zhang Han was a martial artist, but Xian didn't say it more specifically. Under the gaze of the crowd, Zhang Han shook his head slightly and said, "He is not in the Qingfeng sect, we'll have to wait for a few days." "Oh, let's wait a few days," said Xian with a smile. "Let's go to lunch first. After that, Auntie will take you out for a walk," said Rong Jiaxin with a smile. "Let's go." Wang Ming nodded. After they left, Wang Ya went to the guest room and informed Zhao Feng and the others to go to the backside restaurant with them. "Well, Ya, you lead the way, Jiaxin, Jiaxin." Wang Ming kept winking and gesturing to Rong Jiaxin. "Come here." Rong Jiaxin was confused. Then she slowed down and reached Wang Ming. Before Wang Ming could speak, Rong Jiaxin said excitedly, "Ah Ming, I didn't expect that my nephew was also a martial artist. He's like his father, right? I'm so happy." That's right, just like his father. Do you know his level?" Wang Ming asked in confusion. When he learned the news, he was shocked into being incoherent. If Jiaxin found out about it, how could she be so calm? "I'll ask him in the evening," Rong Jiaxin said with a smile. "I've asked him. He almost demolished the Qingfeng sect today. He is a late-stage grandmaster, late stage. I was so scared by the news that I almost had a car accident," Wang Ming exclaimed. Kaboom! Rong Jiaxin only had those words in her mind, Grandmaster late stage, he is at the Grandmaster late stage. What? A few seconds later, Rong Jiaxin screamed and scared several people. Then Rong Jiaxin ran up to Zhang Han and whispered a few words in his ear. After getting a positive reply, Rong Jiaxin suddenly fell silent and looked at Zhang Han for 3 seconds. Everyone could see the strangeness and comfort in her eyes. Soon after, they arrived at the restaurant. The decoration in the restaurant was very neat, and there were only a few decorations in it except for the tables and chairs, which gave off a very bright feeling. There were tables and chairs ranging from the small dining table to the big round table in the restaurant. When they arrived, they saw 8 or 9 people in the hall, who were all Wang Ming's relatives, in addition to Wang Ming's brother and sister-in-law whom they had just met. There was a fat white boy who was 7 or 8 years old and a girl who was 13 or 14 years old. They all looked at the strangers with curiosity. They all sat down after Rong Jiaxin made the introductions with a smile. Seeing Zhang Han's family, many of Wang Ming's relatives were surprised by their outstanding appearance. After all of them were seated, the servants first served tea because although all the ingredients had been prepared, it would take more than 10 minutes to make the meal. During tea time, the girl of 13 or 14 and the boy of 7 or 8, after putting the last few mouthfuls of rice into their mouth, ran over to Zhang Han. "What a beautiful and lovely little sister, I want to kiss her." The white and fat boy stared at Meng Meng, expressing his love with childish words. Xian chuckled. As for Zhang Han, he immediately turned around, reached out his hand, and gently flicked the boy's forehead. "Boy, you can only look at her, not kiss her," warned Zhang Han. "Ha ha, I'm joking, I'm a man and I can protect the little sister," said the boy. This was a kind of imperceptible education of a martial arts family. Boys were all men in charge, and they should protect their families. However, Meng Meng mumbled, "I don't want others to protect me, my powerful papa can do it." The boy laughed, and he didn't mind Meng Meng's words. The girl, who was 13 or 14, stared at Xian and asked hesitantly after a while, Are you Xian?" "Yes." Xian gave her a smile. "Wow!" the little girl exclaimed with great joy and said excitedly, "Xian, I like you and your songs so much, especially the fairy tale town. I can tell the names of all the stories in it and sing them. May I take a picture with you? Many of my classmates like you, too." The little girl looked at Xian with great expectation. "Certainly." Xian smiled and leaned down close to her little fan, and then she made several facial expressions and took photos with the girl. Then the little girl took her brother and ran happily to one side, ready to show off to the students. The meal was soon served. They were all local specialties with good taste, but the ingredients used were much worse than those of Mount New Moon. Apart from the authentic snacks with special taste, the other delicacies didn't attract them very much. Meng Meng soon finished eating. Then she blinked her big eyes and looked left and right. She seemed to be thinking about when they would finish. The little princess was in a good mood because they would go out for fun after lunch.